Okay, gentlemen, I'm about to say nice to see you, but most of you have, different representations. Oh, there we go. Yeah, nice to see everybody. If we could have a brief appearance. Yeah, okay, here we go. Look at that. Real live people. Yeah, Shalom Aleichem. Okay. Most everybody. Yeah, okay, we're going. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so let's get to work. So today's shiur is shiur number 6, and we are starting Siman Tzadik Aleph. Siman Tzadik Aleph will have 2 shiurim on. So today we'll do the first half, Sif Aleph through Dalet, and Mitzvah Hashem, the next shiur we will finish the Siman. Has 8 sifim, but Sif Ches we really already learned already, so it's not going to take too long. This is sort of an overview of what's happening in the Siman. So we are now moving closer and closer to Bosor b'chalav. And you say you're learning Hilchas Bosor b'chalav. So what do we learn in Siman Pei Zayin? We learn what's Bosor and what's chalav and what's leisav ashel, just in general. And then we started talking about people that are just eating at the same table together, Siman Pei Ches. And then we talked, but nobody's eating Bosor b'chalav together over there. We're worried that they might come to share food. But nothing actually got mixed together. We just have a problem. The Rabbanim have been eating together. Then it comes Siman Pei Tes. We have within the same person. Now we already have Bosor and Chalav within the same person. It's just not at the same time. And the question is, what sort of separation do you need in between, and how long do you have to wait? Now, in Tzadik Aleph and Tzadik Beis, we're going to have where the Bosor b'chalav actually comes in contact with each other. And it's interesting because it's sort of from the beginning of Tzadik Aleph till Tzadik Beis, it starts sort of getting closer and closer, the mixture. So basically what we're going to have in Tzadik Aleph is things that touch without heat. In general, okay, Sif Dalet is going to talk about heat, but it's still not cooked together. Whereas in Tzadik Beis, we're going to have already it's cooked together, that some milk fell into the meat or vice versa. And that's a very, long involved, like an extensive siman. Speaking about bittul, technas nevela, and many things of that nature. But there are all sorts of principles over here that also actually go through the whole Yeredeya and Bosor b'chalav as well. So we're talking about without cooking, put it to that way, because if Dalet there is heat, but the heat is not in the traditional way of being cooked together. So we have Sif Aleph base in Gimel is basically when things touched when they're cold. Magakar, it says over here. Puts in Sif Zayin over here. Sif Zayin is sort of in a category by itself, and it's going to come to modify a lot of what we learned in the beginning of the Siman. But we'll leave it for then. We just sort of have to keep in the back of your mind that there's always a but. When we say them, when things touch when they're cold, and it's not really a big problem, there's always the big but, which is going to come up in Sif Zayin, that there are many, many exceptions to the rule. Sif Dalet is going to talk about Magacham, that they touch each other when they're hot. So here's a steak touching some pizza. That's real. You see there's heat coming off of both of them with these gray heat lines. I guess it's steam coming off. And they touch each other. That's going to be Sif Dalet. So that's what we're going to cover today, Aleph through Dalet. And then Hey and Vav are speaking about Malicha. What happens? We know Maliach Kiraseach. When something's salted together, it's like it was cooked together. So what happens if you have milchiks and fleishiks that touch, but there was melach involved? Both of them were salted. One of them was salted, and that's going to be Hevav and Zayin are going to be the next shiur. And as I mentioned, Sif Ches we basically covered already. It's very short. It just speaks about in general that Maliach and Kavush is not Midiraisa, and that we had right at the very, very beginning Simon Pesach. Okay, so that's the outline of what we're going to cover today. So it's the right-hand column and the middle column, Aleph through Gimel, and then Sif Dalet. And more or less, we'll split today's share half and half. Aleph and Gimel will be the first half, and Sif Dalet the second half. More or less. Okay, so let's get to work. Okay, I think I have to change my mode. Okay, so now we're in presentation mode. Oh yes, then I could have presented to you in order. Say them so fine. Okay, so I don't know why we have that email address there, but it's there. Let me just, if you don't mind, I'm going to move this picture. Fine. So let's go back, ignore the email in the middle. And we're going to be speaking about when things touch when they're cold, that if there's any mamoshes involved, we're going to have to get rid of it. So since there's no taste that normally gets transferred when there's no heat, we mentioned malicha, so there are ways that taste can go from one to another. Kavish kemavushal, maliach karaseach, something soaked, pickled, and so on. Taste can be transferred, but normally if there's no heat, we're just worried about remnants, about some mamoshes, which might be a remnant that you have to get rid of. So how do you get rid of it? So we'll see in having the Gemara, and we have especially in Poskim, different levels of how extreme is the intervention to get rid of that remnant. So we're going to have a lot of talk today about hadacha, and that's, I mean, the minimum is not doing anything. And we do have cases, we'll see right at the beginning, the shach, if both you have dry Bosor and dry cholav, you have a dry piece of cheese and a dry piece of meat and nothing's fatty or anything like that, then you don't need anything, the shach says. But if there's any chance of a remnant remaining, then you're going to need hadacha. And that's the minimum level of intervention. And that's hadacha b'mayim. Many of the poskim say that also you should have to run your hand over the surface. They wrote about sayad ala meichel. Not all the poskim mention that. They're just rinsing it in water is sufficient, and that's the inyan of hadacha. So that's the least extreme, if you want to call it that, the lightest intervention we have. And then we have shifshuf. Sometimes it's called shifshuf godel. Yeah, right at the beginning, Pesach Tshuva. He talked about a bachal. Anytime you need hadacha, maybe you really need it. Means shifshuf. And the Maisa and the Poskim, we see that shifshuf or shifshuf godel, as it's called, is not always required. Some cases hadacha is enough. In some cases, the halacha will require shifshuf. Hadacha b'mayim v'shifshuf ma'ameichel heitev. So you have to actually rub, put it under running water, and then you rub it well. You use your hands on the surface in order to actually rub it off. And that, an example of that is when you have some shamnunis, that we know that when you have some sort of leftover fat or grease or oil, something of that sort, this is going to need more work to get it off. And that's shifshuf gadol. That's a second step. A third step beyond that is greda. Sometimes it's called greda, sometimes it's called greda. And that's hasora shchavadaka, taking off a thin layer. And now you might think that that's klifa. So when we say taking something kadei klifa, so that's taking it off, but taking it off all in one layer together. So you have to take off. You have to take off the layer, but is it enough that you take off a little here, a little there, like you have in that scraper over there? So that would be greda or greda. It's called either way. Somebody asked me, is it bosor becholav or bosor v'cholav? So I always thought it was bosor becholav, but bosor becholav is what it's usually called. And I saw it. He pointed out to me that the title of the kuntra is bosor v'cholav. In any case, sometimes it's greda, sometimes it's greda, but it always means the same thing. That we have getting off the outer layer, removing that outer layer, but it doesn't have to be done at once. Klifa is taking off the whole layer at once. And it's understood that it might more or less boil down to the same thing, but mitzias, you're going to have to take a little thicker section in order to be able to do klifa, because otherwise the thing is going to fall apart. So that's why klifa is considered to be more extreme than greda or than greda. Fine.
This picture of greda, that's the accurate description, or that's just their presentation?
That's their presentation. Doesn't have to be that. You can scrape it with a knife. You can. I'll just show you something over here. I think I have it on the screen. Let's see. Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch I have over here. Yeah, this is Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Siman Taf Mem Zayin Hilchos Pesach. As we mentioned a number of times, that the Yeredeya, the place you see it most is Hilchos Pesach. You have a lot of Hilchos Yom Tov as well. And Alter Rebbe is talking about what happens if you use the chametz stick and knife to cut something. So if it's a davar chariv, something which is sharp, that's a problem, and we'll be discussing that in Siman Tzadik Vav. But when is it a problem? Here, look at Sif Nun Ches. Kol davar she'eino chariv shenechtach b'tzakna shel chametz afilu hu ben yemim mutar lo'achla b'Pesach. You can eat it on Pesach, even a couple of chametz stick and knife. As long as you do hadacha. Hadacha is sufficient. So see, Yeredeya Siman Tzadik Vav, which is we'll be learning with Hashem the bikshuyim when it comes to cucumbers. What happens if you rinse a cucumber? I mean, it's very wet to begin with. And hadacha me'el is klum. Hadacha doesn't have tzorach ligra makamachtach. Ayin shamatam. So you see over there, we'll be learning it, and then over here, what happens if there's ba'akrai ba'alma? That it just happened to be somebody cut a piece of chametz with it. Excuse me, the Pesach Michael was cut only once. But let's say you want to buy slices of fish, which is very relevant for us for a fish store. We're going to be bringing down Allah Lamaisa from Oli to Dinim. I'd like to go through the Dinim first, but it's just bringing down the Salter Rebbe so you see the diukim that these different levels. Here we have a dach and greira, and so what happens if you have fish? It still has simonim on it, has the skin, it has the scale, so you can normally buy it, but now they cut it with a chametz stick and knife. So normally hadacha would be enough, but mitzad chumra pesach it's also b'mashu. So we don't, even if you do hadacha on the fish, you don't eat such fish on pesach. And so if it was cut before pesach, so then you can do hadacha on the fish, and then you can eat it. And here we have dinner b'diavad, which we're going to get to later on. Yeah, your Shulchan Aruch says Bosor b'chal, my Shulchan Aruch says Bosor b'chal. Yeah, so fine. Let's go back over here. So here you saw from the Alter Rebbe, he didn't bring down shifshuf, but many of the poskim bring down shifshuf. We had over there hadacha, greira, and klippa. And sometimes, and we're going to have it today, when hot things touch each other, then we take kedei natila. Kedei natila is eva etzba, is the thickness of a finger. According to Chaim Noah, is 2 centimeters, and that you have to take off a layer. In that case, we're not just worried about mamashes, we're worried about absorption. So when you have something which is cooked together, so then it's mispasha bekule when it's cooked in the normal fashion. But if it's not being cooked in normal fashion, we'll soon see some examples. So then it's going to penetrate as a result of the heat. Some of the taste will go into the food, but it's not going to go through the entire food, unless else we'll see if it has shamnunis, it's a different story. If it's a fatty meat or something of the sort, but if it's not fatty meat, so then we only have to take kedei natila. The question in the chat, what does it mean that it'll fall apart, is that if you have to, I don't know if you ever tried to peel a potato, and make one long peel. The kids Pesach sometimes have contests, and they want to see they can keep cutting the peel of peeling the potato, and it doesn't break off. If you want to be successful at such an endeavor, so you're going to have to cut a little thicker than usual, because if it's too thin, it's going to break off into little pieces. So greater, we don't care that it broke off into little pieces. All we care is that in the end, something was taken off the surface all over the area that was exposed, that we have a chash that maybe there was some amashas there. Whereas that's what I meant by falling apart. Whereas klippa, it doesn't fall apart. You take one long slice, and by nature, the metzias is going to be a bit thicker. So therefore, kedei klippa is more severe, quote unquote, than kedei gereda. Clear? Questions?
So this is mina kala kaved, but some of them, it could be the same thing happened, but depending on what the surface was, like the example of the cucumbers, you might have to go more to the kaved, even though the format of it, how it touched.
Right. Yeah. Some cases you'll have machlekes apaskim what it needs, and some cases the metzias is going to guide what it needs. And by the way, this is spread out. This is not in our siman. It's just this is spread out throughout the entire Shulchan Aruch. So you'll find, in fact, a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is in Taruva Simon Kufhei. I mentioned before, Simon Kufhei is central to many of the, Shulchan Aruch was written like the Rambam, that everything was set up as Seder Masuda. You would take all these klalim and put them at the beginning. So what's the Dimba Malicha, and what's called Hat, Yad Saled Display, all of these different klalim that you have in Simon Kufhei are come after you learn it here, and that's why you see a lot of cross-referencing. Here we'll see in our siman, and really throughout Hilchos Bosor B'Cholif to Hilchos Taruvos, where things are discussed over there. And obviously, siman Hey Vav, we're talking about Malicha, is going to cross-reference Hilchos Malicha. So to get a total picture of any of these things, if you're going to try to look up, what is the definition of any of these things, you're going to find pieces of it in Malicha, and pieces of it in Bosor B'Cholif, and pieces of it in Taruvos. And it's like that when you're in Malicha, and it's like that when you're in Taruvos too. It's all, you see, Teira B'Chal is Teira Achas. But here you see it very, very vividly. Okay, let's go on. So now this is the Gemara that we're going to need to understand Sif Aleph. So we have a Mishnah, and then we have a line and a half of Gemara discussing the Mishnah. Zog the Mishnah, Tzeirer Odom Bosor Ugvina B'Matpachas Achas, that a person is allowed to wrap up meat and cheese in one cloth. In our world, you could put the milchiks and fleishiks in the same bag. You can put it in the same bag. But you have to do it in such a way that they don't touch each other. How are you going to make sure Matpachas that they don't touch each other? That's not the Mishnah's problem. If you can work it out, then you can wrap it up in the same cloth, but you're not allowed to have them touch each other. Okay, so too, you could put milchiks and fleishiks. I mean, in our world, things come in packages. So the milk is in a package and the meat is in a package. Yeah, the fact is that sometimes things leak. You can get a container of milk or cheese or something opens up and it spills. And then you're going to have to look and see what it says inside the Galif. What are you going to do about it? In any case, the Gemara says that you don't have to worry that's going to happen. You're allowed to put them in the same matpachas, but you have to make sure that they don't touch each other. Now, just to think about this for one moment, Sim Pei Ches and Pei Tes, we had all sorts of gzeiras, and you might think that Chachamim make a gzeira, you're not allowed to be tzeirer gvina bosor b'matpachas achas. Why? Because they might come to touch each other. Okay, but the Mishnah says no, they did not make such a gzeira. And why is that? So again, gezeiras midrabban. It's hard to ask why we're not allowed to compare one gezeira with another gezeira. But we see the Gemara discusses, what are you worried about? It says you have to be careful, they shouldn't touch each other. So then the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, B'shnei achsnoim, so that we already learned, and also says, Ve'ein chesheshin, if they're shnei achsnoim, they don't know each other. So they can eat at the same table, you don't have to worry, they're going to share. The two different cases, Chum didn't make a gezeira. So the Gemara is, and if they touch each other, so what happens? Like, what's the problem? So they're both cold. It's not a hot mitpachas. So you have cold meat and cold cheese, and they touch each other. So what's the gewalt? What's the big deal? So Abai answers, Nehi de klippa boy, hadachim boy. So even though you don't have to take a de klippa, you don't have to cut off a layer of meat, and you don't have to cut off a layer of cheese, but hadachim boy, you don't need to do hadach you need to do. If they touch each other, then we're concerned that there's going to be some amushas on it. So that's why you're not allowed to have them touch each other. If they do touch each other, then you're going to have to do hadacha. But we're not gezer that you can't put them in matbachas, because why? They might touch, and then you might have to do hadacha. What's going to be if they needed hadacha and you forgot hadacha? So we're going to learn that today. So what happens? So that's the basic klal that we have, which is the background. The background for Sif Aleph. So let's see now in the so we learn a few din. L'chatchila, you're not allowed to have them touch each other. We don't ask you putting them in the matachas. You can put them in the same bag, the same wrapper, but l'chatchila, you're not allowed to have them touch each other. B'diavad, then they need hadacha. Okay, so those are the two klalim, the basic dinim, which are the structure we're going to be learning. That's going to guide us through the first three sifim, basically. So here's Shulchan Aruch.
I imagine that mitpachas, the way they used it back then, they were able to divide them into separate areas. It's not like a shopping bag today where they're just pushed against each other.
Yeah, I imagine you could take a mitpachas and then like make it like the letter S. Yeah, and then put one over here and one over there. But theoretically speaking, you do the same thing with the bag. Take the bag and wrap it up and put one layer for the meat, one layer for the fish. Theoretically speaking, you could do that too. Okay, but it might be. I understand your point. It's probably easier in those days. Okay, so there's Shulchan Aruch. You see, take it straight from the Gemara. Bosor gevina shnagos zeh b'zeh mutar. So you see where it came from, but the Mechaber starts off with the case that they already touched each other. Okay, what happens if they touch each other? So we're talking about cold Bosor and cold gevina. So you don't answer the Bosor and the gevina. Starts with Rabbi. They're going to have to do hadacha. The place where they touch each other, you're going to have to do hadacha. You have to rinse off the meat, and you have to rinse off the cheese. Now it goes back to the Mishnah. But you're allowed to wrap them up in one cloth. And you don't worry, you don't answer it because we're afraid they're going to touch each other. You allow it, and you have to make sure they don't touch each other. What happens if they do touch each other? They're mutter, but you have to do hadacha. Fine. Now, the Shach adds, he brings from the Bach, that if they're both dry, then they don't even need hadacha. Now, we could imagine cases, this is really guided by common sense. If there's a chance that there's a reishim, that there was some mamoshes of meat on the cheese or cheese on the meat, so then obviously you're going to need hadacha. But if something is really dry, the Shach says that there's no problem. Now, the Rebbe quotes in Ilchas Pesach, the Shach, and it brings a case where you had a raw piece of chicken and a piece of kernel of wheat fell onto the chicken, and the surface of the chicken was dry, and the piece of wheat was dry. And Alter Rebbe said, you take and this you're talking about chametz also b'mashru, that you take off the kernel of wheat, and you don't even need hadacha on the chicken. Not a problem. Paskin like the Shach. But again, let's say the chicken was not 100% dry, so then obviously it goes under the general category. So that's says over here, Bosor gevina lachem. They were talking about moisture, that there was moisture over there. So I guess you see the shiny part of the schnitzel over here shows that it's wet, I guess. And okay, that's what it's talking about. You need hadach. But if it's mamas yavish, then you don't need anything. That's what the Shach says. Now, if it's a davar shamein, so I'm not sure what a salami that you have a picture over here would not be considered a davar shamein. But I guess you have a piece of plastic on the outside, which prevents it from being shamein. Cheese could also be a davar shamein. But here you also have a layer. They put wax sometimes around the cheese. So maybe that's the case over there, but that's the shach, that if it's dry, you don't need anything. But again, what happens if there's shamnunis there? So then if there's shamnunis, so this is a fatty cheese, and you have some, you see there's fatty pieces of meat. So then it's not even enough hadacha, you need shivshuv. So that's a case where it says clearly in the poskim, you're going to need shivshuv. And I mentioned that when we define shivshuv, because the nature is that when you want to wash something that has fat or grease on it, anybody washed the dishes lately, you know if there's fat or grease on it, so then it's going to take more effort to actually wash it properly. So,
but isn't there like shamnunis on even hard cheeses and hard meats? I mean, there's epis of shamnunis,
well, it depends. Yeah, somebody's in the chat that it's it's a dried salami. I mean, you have it could be difficult to imagine. You have Tanagolta the Rabbi speaks about in the Gemara. You can imagine a dried out piece of schnitzel. It doesn't have fat on it, and it doesn't have luchluchis on it. So if you have such a thing, there's all different types of cheeses. And okay, so if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. But Shulchan Aruch, in the Shulchan Aruch, it exists. And the Alter Rebbe brings a practical case. So if you have a piece of cheese that's dried up like a kernel of wheat, so then you have the dinner plane. Okay, things which are soft. And that's the din which I showed you from the Alter Rebbe. So this is imported from later on, from Tzadik Vav, as I mentioned. So that needs also greater. So that we mentioned, you have, let's say somebody was cutting a salad, and it ended up touching a piece of meat. So then just hadacha is not going to be enough. You have to do greater, however way you want to say it. And this is the but I told you from Siv Zayin, and Siv Zayin is something which became soft as a result of being cooked or baked. That's in Siv Zayin, that many of these dinim that we see hadacha is enough, is that we're talking about raw meat. And once you cook the meat, it has a different status. But it's a whole big machlekes with a Ramah and Pshat Ramah, and that we're going to learn in Siv Zayin. But just keep in mind, and that's why you have in most of the pictures over here, they're going to be using raw meat, because that's where most of the cases, we'll have some cases of cooked meat too, but basically we're talking about raw, because the din becomes more strict once it's been transformed through bishul, or afia, or tzliya, or for that matter anyway. Fine. So let's move on to Siv Beis. Now Siv Beis, the Torah brings down a Bala Itur. So it's interesting, the Mechaber doesn't usually quote the sources. This is the Torah. So this is the quote from the Torah. And you see from the Torah, it's interesting that the whole discussion in this Lashon, the Bala Itur from the early Bala Teisvus. So the Bala Itur learns out from the din that we just learned, a whole Machlekes Achreinim, exactly which detail of the din we just learned, but that you can look at. The Tas speaks about it, the other Achreinim speak about it. So Shema Mina that we learn out from this, the Kol Midid the Boy Hadacha, anything that's going to need Hadacha. Kagain Bosor Heter Tzeinen, Bekaira Shal Isser Tzeinen. For example, if you have a cold piece of meat on a cold treifa keli, okay, so you see what the Bala Itur is doing, is generalizing from the din we just learned, and he's generalizing it one way, which is pretty obvious. He's doing it from Bosor B'chalav from Bosor to Isser. Okay, that's a logical, very logical extension. He's also taking us into the other realm of Kalim, a treifa Kalim. So he says, also l'chatchil. You're not allowed to do it. Dilma achal b'lei hadacha. But maybe you're going to eat the food without doing hadacha. So let's just go back over here. We had the Shulchan Aruch. Let's go back to the Gemara. The Bala Itur is way before Shulchan Aruch, obviously. He's quoting on the Gemara. The Mishnah said, you're not allowed to have them touch each other. Why not? Why not? What happens if they touch each other, like Abai says? Then you have to do a dach. The Gemara says, what happens? What's the big deal? They touch each other. So Abai says, you have to do a dach. So what's the shlecht? What should be the problem? Have them touch each other, and then do a dach, and everything's okay. So what's the problem? But the Mishnah says it is a problem. And lechatchila, you're not allowed to have them touch each other. So comes along Bali Yitur, it's pushed to Pshat and Bali Yitur. So Shema Mina, that any time that they have two things that if they touch, they're going to need hadacha, then you're not allowed to begay them a situation that you're going to need hadacha. And therefore, you're not allowed to put kosher food on a treifa keli, because kosher food on a treifa keli, you need hadacha. We're soon going to discuss this more. That din itself. So the Bal Yitur is taking examples of Davar Poshet, which is not Poshet at all, as we're soon going to see. But if you need hadacha on food that was put on a treif and a keli, so that means you're not allowed to put food on a treif and keli, because we see from the Mishnah that if you're going to need hadacha, you're not allowed to do it lechatchila and rely on the hadacha you're going to do later on. The Bal Yitur says the reason because dil ma'acha b'lei hadacha. That's what the Bal Yitur. Shmamina kol mitzvah b'lei hadacha. Any other case that you need hadacha, you're not allowed to do lechatchila. What's the example? He gives a keli. Can get Bosor heter tzeinen. You have a cold piece of kosher meat, but kair shel iser tzeinen, and you have a bowl of that's prohibited, and the bowl is cold, the keli is cold, and the meat is cold. Also, lechatchila, you're not allowed to eat off treifa kelim. Why? What's the problem? Do a dacha, because dil ma'ach b'lei dacha. So we're worried you might do it without a dacha. If you did it already, okay. So don't eat it without a dacha. Do a dacha. So that is the tour quoting the Bala Yitur, and Muhammad leaves out the name Bala Yitur, as mentioned. But that's we're going to be discussing a sif base. What's with the kelim? And he adds over here, "V'dafke bater mavushal the lav orcha badacha." And this is only talking about meat that's ready to eat. The word over here of mavushal is not whether it's uncooked or cooked. The same thing, mavushal, you'll see the reason would be even if it's raw, but you're not going to rinse it. Avol mided the orcha badacha, but something which the normal way to use it is to rinse it first. Again, Bosor chayiv kiyetzebei. For example, raw meat. Raw meat. So before you do malicha, you're going to have to do adacha. You have a dacha rishena, dacha achrena. First soak in water, then you salt it, then you rinse it again. So
Bosor chai means raw and unsalted.
Correct, according to most of the Mefarshim. Now, this is really totally on what's the orcha. In any case, let's finish the sentence here. Of amid the orcha badach, but something that the normal manner of usage, that's orcha, the eirach, the derech, is to do a dacha. Bring an example, Bosor chai, or anything like Bosor chai. Shari lechatchila. Then you're allowed to do a lechatchila. You're allowed to have them touch each other. Why allowed to have them touch each other? Because we're not worried that you're not going to do a dacha, because people always do a dacha. There's some people that always rinse their fruit. B'chal, they say that it's healthy. They're spraying all the fruit with stuff which is designed to kill live creatures. So although insect life and human life is quite different, but we're also live creatures. So it's not good to ingest the stuff that they're spraying on the apples. So you should rinse an apple. Which is not to say that there are not people that eat apples without rinsing them. But if the derech is that that this type of fruit is normally rinsed, so we have no problem allowing it to touch, to put it on a tray for plate, or to have it, again, if you're going to eat it straight off the plate, then it's going to need hadacha, according to what we learned over here. We'll soon see that not everybody agrees with that, and Psak Halacha is not like that. But anything that the normal way, this is just an illustration of the klal. The klal is you're not allowed to do something if you're going to need hadacha later on. Now you're allowed to put on the plate if you're going to do hadacha anyway. So whether it's Bosor Chai, let's say you open up a package of meat that comes from the butcher kashered it already, and you have some meat. Now, does the Bala Basta rinse it before she puts it? She's making cholent. She has some meat. Does she rinse the meat before she puts it in a cholent? So there are people that do rinse the meat, and then people that don't rinse the meat. So if she always rinses the meats, then it's not something you need to worry about. But if again, the whole discussion here, do you go after what the derech is of the individual or the derech b'chlal? In most cases in Allah, you go after the derech b'chlal. So that's why I answered you b'pashtus, that is talking about unsalted meat, because unsalted meat is going to be rinsed by everybody. And theoretically speaking, they could do tzli, but we normally assume it's basal l'katera, and therefore it's going to get hadach. Okay, so now we're entering the realm of kalim. Just from the contrast, what they bring down over here, I just want to go back to Sif Aleph over there. The Piskei Tshuva mentioned about a davar charif, that a davar charif. Okay. Nice to hear from you, but we're going to mute you. Sorry about that. Yeah. So excuse me 1 second. I just took attendance. 1 second. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the Piskei Tshuva brings down the din of a davar charif. We'll leave that really for the discussion of Malicha, but we see that if you have a davar charif and a lach, so it's also not so not so poshut about whether you're allowed to do lachatchila. I'm going back to Sif Aleph that I mentioned. The Shach says of davar yovesh you're allowed to put it there, but once you get in the realm of something sharp, it's not so poshut. But we're going to discuss that later on. The Sif putting salt in a treifa keli or a milcha keli, then using it with basar and so on. We'll get to that in Mirza Hashem later on. Okay, so here we have the din of the Baal Itur, and now we're going to go into the dinim of Kalim. And what exactly is the problem over here? Here's somebody who had a piece of Bosor, flew into the Kedera, little action over there to spice things up. And that's the difference between a raw, unsalted piece of meat, which you're going to do hadacha on, and this cooked piece of chicken is not a candidate for hadacha. Nobody would normally do hadacha on such a piece of chicken. So the first case would be mutter to put in because it's going to get hadacha. The derech is hadacha, and the cooked one is not the derech of hadacha. And then we have a nice illustration of what's okay and what's not okay, and we have the reason behind it in the name of the Bala Itter. Okay, so that's the klal Bala Itter. You're not allowed to put can't put it in a treifa keli. Now, the problem is, as all the Mefarshim point out, that the Bala Itter seems to be going directly against a Beferish Gemara in Psach. Because the Gemara in Psachim says, that if your keli, which is used for chametz, you're allowed to use it for matzah as long as it's cold. So what's the problem? Obviously, you're not doing hadacha on the matzah. So what are the Bala Itter talking about? And what is the Gemara Psachim talking about? So the Ramah speaks about this in a number of places. You have Dark Mesh on the tour, right on this piece of the tour that we have quoted on top of the page, that the Dark Mesh brings down a number of terutzim. Altogether, the Dark Mesh brings down 3 different possible differentiations. We're going to discuss 2 of them right now because only 2 of them made it into the Ramah. The Shach is more interested in the 3rd one, really, but the Ramah is going to bring down 2 of them, and let's go through them from the Dark Mesh. So Dark Mesh brings the first teretz, and again, we're trying to understand why is it that the Gemara Psachim says you're allowed to put the chametz keli is like a treifa keli on Pesach. You're allowed to put matzah in the treifa keli. The Balta Itter says you're not allowed to put the heter in a treifa keli. So what's the difference? So the first teretz, the Dark Mesh says, is talking about 2 different types of kelim. The Baal Iter is talking about a kli iser. What do you mean a kli iser? Kli shabala iser cham, that it absorbed taste through heat. So here you have a pot, and they cook the iser in it, and as a result of that, when we say a kli iser, it's kli iser. You could even see the diakoloshin. Kaira shel iser, a kaira shel iser. Okay, it's a kaira shel iser. What does it mean kaira shel iser? So according to this, it means a kaira shel iser. See in the Baliter over here, according to the Torah, kaira shel iser means it's a treifa keli. How to become a treifa keli? If you have a keli that was only used for something cold, it never absorbed any taste. It's not really a kaira shel iser. Now it's seinin, okay, that's kaira shel iser seinin, but it absorbed b'cham. So that's what the Baliter is talking about. It's a treif and a keli. You're not allowed to use a treif and a keli. But over there, it doesn't say a treif, a chametz, a keli, shnishtamesh by chametz, a keli used of chametz. How to use of chametz? The Baliter tzainin, that it absorbed the betzainin. Now, what does it mean it absorbed the betzainin? So there's you have it was used betzainin, and that there was no real belief. It was just used cold. Normally, we say no taste was absorbed, and you might say that we're worried about maybe there's some amashas. If we'll use treif, you'd be worried about it. And over here, we're not worried about it. But in any case, Achrayim explain kli shabala is means it was absorbed through malicha or kavush. So you have kavush. This again is more material for Hilchos Taruvos, Simon Kufay, but it's a very interesting thing. I don't want to get. It's a very important topic, but it's a topic for Hilchos Taruvos. But I'm just going to mention that the whole idea of answering a keli because it's kavush is very a matter of great discussion, very controversial in halacha. Why is that? Because the kavush kimavushum is normally after it's sitting there for 24 hours. Okay, so let's say you had an iser sitting in a keli for 24 hours, and it's beleya the iser, and we say that is midiraisa, it's beleya the iser. Now, if you use it later on with something hot, so it'll absorb the taste. But if you use it later on for something cold, when is it going to become aser? Also through kavisha. So what's going to happen? It's going to have to sit 24 hours in the keli. So think about this a second. So let's say at 12 o'clock noon on Monday, Isser was put in the keli and it sat there for 24 hours until 12 o'clock noon on Tuesday. Okay, so now it's Aser. And then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday, you put in a heter and it sits over there for 24 hours. When is it going to become Aser? Only on 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Now, what's with the time? The time by 1 o'clock Wednesday is already Eina Ben Yemeh. It's already more than 24 hours. I know we didn't learn the din of Eina Ben Yemeh, but I'm sure all of you are aware that once the keli has not been used for 24 hours, has a din of a tam pogum, and we're going to learn about Eichas later on. But it doesn't normally have the power to answer something unless it's davar charif or something. But normally, Neisen tam lefgam, if it's Eina Ben Yemeh, it's more than 24 hours old. So then it's not going to answer anything. So, and they're paskin like this lamaisa, and they say that a keli, if it's only being used but seinin, even if it was a treif in a keli, it doesn't have the keich to make anything treif, because by the time the taste that was absorbed al yedei seinin through kavush k'mavushal in the keli, it's not going to go out into the second one later on. So that's just an illustration about why we'll be more mekel, even though both of these kelim are aser. The keli shabola iser cham is also because it absorbed taste. The keli shabola iser tzayin also absorbed taste. Just giving one illustration of how it could see an nafkamir. Who cares how it became treif? We don't need to know your yichus. Comes possible cholav, it's not a difference. We said it's not that official. But as far as using a kli shel iser, so what should be the difference? We learned before the beginning of Peizayin that lagabe bishul is not called bishul, but lagabe the union of. Gotta mute everybody. Excuse me. That midiraisa, we say that's called tam. Okay, so if you're going to use it later on in the case of tzainin, which is what we're talking about over here, we're talking about whether you are going to allow something cold to be put into the keli or not allow something cold to be put into the keli. So we see it's a clear difference whether it absorbed al yedei cham or it was beleya al yedei tzainin. So that is the first resolution. Again, to review, The problem is the Baal Iter looks like he's going against the Beferish Gemara. Because the Gemara says it's not a problem to put matzah in the Kalish and Shtamish Bechametz. So why is the Baal Iter saying you're not allowed to do it? Because it's going to need a dacha and you might forget to do a dacha. The Gemara says it's okay. So the first answer, Dark Mesha, is it's not a stira. The Baal Iter answers it because that Kali absorbed through Isser Cham. And the Gemara in Pesachim is talking about the Chametz Matzah, is talking about that it absorbed a Keli, which is not as treif, if you want to put it in such terminology, because it only was Beleya al Yedei Isser Tzeinim. Question in the chat. Is Kli treif based on the thing going into it? It's Leisha Gachis, or is a Kli treif only a Keli that's already also for everything? Right now, we're talking about this din, a Kli can be treif. Right now, it's absorbing treif, but right now, the din of Rabbi Iter was what we're discussing, which we'll see in Shulchan Aruch Sif Beis, is that we're talking Bosor Heter. So it's a Bosor Heter. The Kair Shel Isser, because sometime in the past it absorbed the Isser. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that answers the question.
So if it's a kosher milchik dish, Kaylee, it's not considered a klitre.
Well, we're going to soon learn. That's what you're asking. Over here, it's going to be the same thing. You know, you're allowed to take some cornflakes with milk, you know, and eat it in the chicken soup bowl. Who says you need separate kalim, b'chlal, if you're going to use for cold? The Baal Iter says you're not allowed to do it. Okay, so we do have cases with the Bosor and Cholav. I mentioned this the very first year, that we're more lenient because both of them are beheter. And as we saw by the din of Cholav Nimsa Bekeva, you see many cases where we're more lenient because both of them are heter. But in general, one lagabe the other is considered to be iser. So, you know, why does Bosor B'Cholav comes before Tarubas is an interesting question to discuss. But really, Bosor B'Cholav is a subcategory of Tarubas. When you're talking about Bidl B'Shishim, it's the same din basically if it's Isser falling into a heter or it's Bosor falling into Cholav or Cholav falling into Bosor. Each one, Lagabi, the other one is considered to be Isser. So you're talking about a Kalish al Isser or a Kalish al Bosor, and you have the opposite type, milk being used in a Kalish al Bosor, it's basically the same thing. Okay,
I'm not sure I understand the difference because, I mean, for at least a 24-hour period, whether like it got cooked together in the kli cham, or it just got to the 24 hours after the kvisha, still for 24 hours after that time, it's the same status of treif, no?
So you're saying it shouldn't make a difference?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to, you know, there's certain people, they read a story, they go to the end of the story to see what happens in the end. La halacha, you're right, what you just said now. That's what the Shach is going to say. Okay, and that's an Alter Rebbe Paskins like that too. So Lamaisa, we need another resolution to this. We have a contradiction here, an apparent contradiction that needs a resolution. Okay, but the Shach is going to reject this resolution. Alter Rebbe Paskins like that too. So la halacha, although we could see a way to differentiate, but safe Maisa, like you just said. But if you're putting something cold inside, it's not going to absorb anyway. So what's the difference? Okay, so the theoretical difference I gave you with Kovush. But anyway, Lamaisa, first of all, even the Dark Mesha wasn't satisfied with this teretz. He brings a second teretz. Let's go further. What's the second teretz? The Dark Mesha. We're not talking about the nature of the Keli. We're talking about the nature of what you put in the Keli. Now, when the Baal Iter prohibiting it, when you put in a davar lach, you put in something which has moisture. Masha enkem, when you put in a davar yavesh, you put in something dry like matzah, which is what the Gemara and Pesachim are talking about. So something dry like matzah doesn't pick up things as quickly as something which is a davar lach. Now, I'm going to put in the third teretz because you have it discussed in Dark Mesha and Teres Chatas. Just, you know, not just throwing names. And Teres Chatas is frequently quoted by the Shach and Taz. Teres Chatas is the Ramah, and it has more explanations, more in Arichas. It's written on the Seder of the Sharedura. We discussed this before. But if you want to see Shittas Ramah, so sometimes you can see it clear, and that's why the Mepharshim are often quoting Kosovatach It says in Taras Chatos, it's the same Ramah. So he brings down, you have both, you have in the Darkemesha, which is on the Torah, and the Taras Chatos. So you have discussed the third teretz. And the third teretz is how clean is the keli? Didn't have dishwashers in those days. So when you have a keli shalisir, there could be a little bit of a remnant left on the keli. It doesn't mention how clean these kelim are. That's a third way of differentiating between the two. So when you're talking about in Gemara Pesachim, you're talking about the keli is clean, and there's no remnant of chametz. It's the middle of Pesach. You did beer chametz already. For sure, there's no chametz around. You went around with a candle, with a spoon, all 9 yards. There's no mashu chametz left in the whole house. So that's totally, there's no mamashas over there. We have a kaira shalisir who says 100% clean. Now, it might be somewhat difficult for us to understand this, but first of all, you learn Hilchos Erev Tafshilin about for Erev Tafshilin, you need a cooked food, and it doesn't have to be so chashuv. Lechatchila, you should use a Michael chashuv, but it says anything, even if you scrape, there's leftover fat on the knife, and you scrape off the fat, take the fat off the knife, and that could be Erev Tafshilin. The fat came from cooked meat, and flesh knife, obviously. So you have the fat, which is on the shuman, which is on the knife, and you scrape that off, and it's no problem as long as it's as long as it's a kazayis. Kazayis on a knife. How do you get a kazayis? I mean, there's people that don't clean the dishes so well. This is the secret trick they teach you in husband school to get out of washing the dishes. That you wash it, and then you wash it not so great over there. Your wife doesn't want you to do dishes anyway, right? No, we don't do such tricks. But it could be that the husband doesn't wash the dishes as well as the wife washes the dishes. Could be it's the other way around. We don't want to discriminate. But in any case, it could be that the dishes are washed, okay, but there's something which is left on it. For us, it's hard to imagine a kazayis. I mean, that's a pretty dirty knife to have a kazayis of shuman left on the thing. Shame. Whatever the case is, the Baal is talking about a case where it was not 100% clean, or we're worried it's not 100% clean, or bastama kliyasir. Maybe we can even extend that. The Alter Rebbe not going to say it like that. The Shach doesn't say it like that. But we're going to say that even the keli is clean. He's talking about a keli that's clean, but we're worried some cases it's not going to be 100% clean. Whereas when klish and shtamish bechametz, by the time Pesach comes, for sure it's clean. There's no mamashas to worry about. So we're worried about mamashas, not worried about mamashas. But for the Ramah does not quote that third reason. Okay, we're going to have a machlekes now in understanding the psak halach, and also the Darkemesha brought some terutzim, but it didn't bring a conclusion. You want the conclusion, so you have to learn the Ramah. So now let's learn the Ramah. So this is the Mechaber Sif base, which he takes the Balita's name off this din. Kol midad the boy adacha, anything which needs rinsing. Kagain lanich Bosor heter tzeinin b'kaira shalisar tzeinin. Putting kosher meat in a non-kosher bowl. Also lachatchila. You're not allowed to do lachatchila. Dil ma'acha b'lei adach. Because maybe you're going to come to eat it, you're not going to do adach, and you're not allowed to eat without adach. You have to do adach. And v'davka b'vushel lavorcha b'adacha, and with only talking about cooked meat or something else which is not normally rinsed, avomida the orcha b'adacha, but something which the derech is to rinse it. Again, basar chaya kiyetze b'zeh, or kiyetze b'shara lachatchila. Then it's allowed lachatchila if it's something which is normally rinsed, like raw meat. And as we mentioned before, normally we're going to say that it's meat that needs to be salted. Now the Ramah comes along, and now what does the Ramah do to save this din from contradicting the Gemara Pesachim? And by the way, it's in Shulchan Aruch, also Pesach also. I mean, we pass like this, right? So what's the difference in this case and that case? But this is something which has some moisture. That was the second answer, Darkemesha. Avodav yavish mamish. But if it's dry, and then the Ramah pulls a fast one on us. Something which is dry, you're expecting him to finish the sentence, but if it's dry, it's okay. So he says that you have dry, it's okay, but he puts in a second condition, which was the first reason. If the keli only absorbed with cold, then you can put it inside, and it doesn't need adach anymore, because you have both. The Ramah ends up taking both reasons and requiring both of them. So it's almost as if he wasn't sure whether the first one is it's like many cases you see in halacha, you have two taimim, and you're not sure which is the right, so you're machmer according to both of them. And this is b'pashtus, the way we learn the Ramah, that the Ramah takes the first two reasons and is machmer like both of them. So therefore, not only it has to be a keli that absorbed b'tzainin, but also it has to be only a davar yavish. You need tartil tevusa, the lashon halacha. You need both factors which are going to save you. Both good factors, quote unquote. In other words, to make it a heter, that it's got to be dry, and it's got to be a keli which absorbed only through cold. But if you're missing any one of them, in other words, you have a davar yavish, but the keli absorbed through cham, the Rambam is going to say no. Conversely, if you have the keli absorbed through tzainin, so the keli is okay. But if the food that went in is a davar lach, it's also no good. So that's b'pashtus, the way you learn the Ramah. Now, before we get into Shach and Taz, I'll just give you the overview of what the Shach and Taz do with this. Okay. The Taz says that either one of these two reasons is sufficient on its own. So he's more makel than the Ramah. The Ramah requires both reasons, and the Taz says each one on its own is also good enough. And he changes around the gears of the Ramah, and he says really the Ramah meant to say that also, but something obviously went wrong over here. We'll soon see that the wording of the Ramah does not read properly. This, the Taz points out that there's something wrong with this girsa. Girsa doesn't really make sense. We'll go back to that in a second. We'll just get the overview. The Ramah says you need both. The Taz says either one of those two reasons is sufficient. Either a dry food or even a wet food, but the keli only absorbed through cold. The Shach throws all of this away. And Shach says, we don't care whether it's wet or cold. We don't care how the keli absorbed either. Okay, so if the keli absorbed through cham, and it has both tartil reyes, it has both negative factors, both factors which would normally prohibit it. So it's not yavish, it's lach, which is a reason to be more strict. And the keli didn't absorb through cold, the keli absorbed through the hot, which is also a reason to be machmer. As long as the keli is clean, it's mutter. Now the Rebbe passing like the Shach, Milchus Pesach. So bekitzer, the Ramah says you need both reasons in order to allow it. Let's make this real life. You're doing a bikkur bayis, you're on Mitzrayim, and you visit somebody's house, and they say, "Oh, here I know, Rabbi, you only eat kosher, so here are some grapes," and they put it in a treifa plate. People don't keep kosher. Adata, they don't keep kosher. And they give you a bowl of fruit. So if it's an orange, okay, borsha to torani, and you're going to peel the orange, no problem. You took kedei netila, kedei clip, or whatever. But what happens if it's you're not going to start peeling grapes in front of the people there? What are you going to do? Going to rinse the grapes again? Can you eat them? There's lechatchila, there's b'diavad. Anyway, what's the din? Let's say you're traveling and you're stuck, and there you are with your cornflakes and milk, and the only thing around is a treifa bowl. You're allowed to use it. A fleishika bowl, you're allowed to use it. You have nothing else to eat with. Are you allowed to use it? So anyway, the Ramah says you need two factors of the first two. The Taz says even one factor is good enough. And the Shach says as long as it's clean, you can use it. Now, it's not there are kvias. We'll soon go through that. There's limitations. I mean, you can't just get by with two, for cold, get by with one set of dishes. That you can't do. You can't do it by kvias. It's only by fanare, temporary emergency situation, whatever it is. But are you allowed to do it? Lechatchila. So the Shach says as long as it's clean, then it's okay. And the Balei Itur's case is talking about where it's not clean, or worried that it's not clean, whatever the case is. So let's just see this inside. So the Ramah says you're allowed to put it in the keli iser rak only if you have both conditions. First of all, manichim davar yavash, that the food itself is dry, like a matzah, and a shimash bekeli hoya b'tzainin, and the keli was used was cold. And if you want to just put this in other words, this is the way that Ramah learns pshat in the Gemara and Pesachim. That's why the Gemara and Pesachim says no problem putting the matzah on the plate. Okay, the Taz comes along and says no, one of them is enough. Yeah, either you're putting in something dry, or the usage of the keli only was used for something cold. So then, if it's a davar yavish, you got factor number one. Then we don't care how the keli became non-kosher, even if absorbed through heat, it's okay. Now, if we have only the second factor, that the keli was only used for cold, so then you can put even a davar lach. The Taz says either reason alone. Along comes the Shach and says we don't care about either one. Even if it absorbed through heat, you can even use the davar lach. Skip the parentheses a second. As long as the food you put inside was cold and the keli is clean, then there's no problem. You can even put it in the chatchil. Now the Shach has a lengthy, the parentheses over here. Do you need? How do you know it's clean? What's the definition of clean? You know, it comes to washing the dishes. One person has one definition. Did you clean the dishes? And one says yes. And one says this doesn't look like it's clean to me. Okay, what does it mean? Bedtime inspection at camp. What's called clean? Do you need hadacha, or is enough kinuach hetev? So the Shach concludes that kinuach brings rayas, that kinuach hetev, that if you wiped it well, even without water, as long as you can see that it's clean, it's also good enough to be called clean. And here you can see it from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. This is Nochas Pesach in Tov Nun Aleph, and you have it discussed in some other places also. But kli chametz motel leitzim makom. Yeah, what about a chametz tekekeli on Pesach? So you look at Shulchan Aruch. So there's no din that you have to sell chametz tekkelim. You have to clean chametz tekkelim, but you don't need to sell chametz tekkelim. And when you have the dinim about a Pesach Holias B'Shabbos, it speaks about wiping clean the remnants of food from the keli before this man iser chametz from the Suda Shabbos morning. So then, if you clean it with your finger, it's enough. You don't need water. In any case, but you're allowed to use. Are you allowed to use? You need a keli. You need a keli, and all you have is a chametz keli. Are you allowed to use it? So today we sell the kelim together. Whether you sell the keli out there, but in the start says you sell the keli. He's not worried about tabling afterwards. All discussion of famous the Rebbe. Some safers, worried about selling keli. You might have to, when it's bought back, you're gonna have to table it. But the Rebbe's medayik explains why it is called an Alter Rebbe, that the mechira is a mechira and it's not a harama, and nevertheless you don't have to table a keli. Famous chelik tasai. In any case, the normal practice, you have to take the kelim and you have to put them away somewhere because you're not allowed to use them with hot. That you're not allowed to use. But can you use it for cold? So Alter Rebbe paskins mutter. You can take them out. You have to put them away out of circulation, so a person shouldn't use it for accident for something hot. And you can use it for something cold. Bein lach or bein yavish. We don't care whether it was lach or yavish. Raksha yizorla diachas akele heitev. But you just have to be careful to rinse the keli before you use it. To make sure there's no chametz which is attached to it. And with the Mitzad Chumrah, the Pesach, certainly one should do that, not just wipe it, but again, the Alter Rebbe mentions that about Erev Pesach Cholias B'Shabbos. But then you're not putting food in that keli, you're just putting it away. And then there's a whole other machlekes over here about a kedera shel cheres. But before we get to that, are there any questions on what we covered? So that is the background to the din, and that's the halacha. We'll come to this din of cheres in a minute. Let's put the limitations on this din. Okay, so you're allowed to use a treifa keli. Yeah, do treifa keli. Who uses treifa keli? Or who uses milchik for fleshik for milk just because it's cold? It's out there. It says the Shulchan Aruch, the Shach says you're allowed to do it. The Shach says okay. The Taz says even according to the Taz, and the Taz can also find you a heter. The Ramah, you're going to be more restricted, but it looks like everybody's allowing it. So what's the story? What's with this two sets of dishes business? So this is the main thing. Shemush kavua aser. You're not allowed to be kaveil like that. If you use it all the time, then people think that it's okay to use, and you're going to end up using it for something hot. Rak shimush are mutter. You're only allowed to use it temporarily. Teaching in seminar, usually most years I get the chance, I teach a class called guerrilla kashrus. Guerrilla as in guerrilla warfare, keeping kosher under difficult conditions. And this is one of the dinim you need to know when it comes to using a keli. So Alter Rebbe paskins, if it's not it's only derech arai, it's an emergency situation. You have no other kelim, so you're allowed to use them for cold. If you don't have any other kelim, it's less of a problem than it used to be. Now we have plastic plates, paper plates. Disposable, it makes this much less of a shaila. But again, sometimes there's an uncomfortable situation. You go to somebody's house and they pour you a cold drink. Pour you a cold drink. So what's it's a treifa keli. So what's the din? So the din is ba'ifan it's mutter. Now the exception to the rule, first of all, not ba'ifan kavua. Secondly, mashke chorif. That if it's a mashke chorif, like you have a bramfen, you have scotch, you have vodka. These things, alcohol is a davar charif. You don't need 24 hours to take out the tam. Now, if it's davar charif, yava,
First you should have orange.
it's different over here.
First is orange.
Is that a question or is that just a spot?
Someone's mic, you have to disable it.
Mute all. I say mute upon entrance, but it doesn't seem to work too well. This is like an old gripe with Zoom. In any case, a davar charif, that's yavash. That you have a chveis, you have an onion sitting on a plate, so that's not a problem. But a mashke, we're worried because the time period for a davar charif to absorb taste, we say kavish kemavushel. So if it's not a davar charif, then it takes 24 hours. Davar charif, it's the amount of time that it takes to put halation l'arsiach. Anyway, it's not a clear definition in terms of minutes, but it's a short period of time. Okay, it's much less than a half hour. Okay, so and this is actually, you should be aware that I don't know a poll, whether it's all kashrus agencies or most kashrus agencies or many kashrus agencies, whatever it is, when it comes to giving a hechsher to a place that rents kalim, so drinking glasses, they use the treifa ones. Because it's beifan arai, and maybe for the hotel or the restaurant, where whoever's renting the kalim, it's beifan kavua, but there's no isser on the keli, it's being used cold, so there's no problem. The problem is somebody's going to take one of those drinking glasses and they're going to put mashke in it. And that's why you have many of the achsheidim will give out little plastic mashka glasses and say that by the bar, either they have a separate set of glasses for the bar where they're serving the liquor, or they give little plastic glasses disposable, so people shouldn't come to use those treifa glasses together with the davar charif. But that's a case where also they end up treating that as also being be'efan arai, although one could debate whether that's the case or not. That is MK policy, by the way, speaking of Montreal. And there's another issue which has nothing to do with Belias Isser, and that's a din of Tvilas Keilim. Because when you have a Keilir, it's not tabled, the food inside a Keilir that's not tabled remains kosher. However, there's the Isser Gavra that you're not allowed to use for eating a keli that's not tabled. So let's say, okay, so what's the keli made out of? So it's made out of plastic. So many poskim that have handled, many of them, Rabbanah Chabad and Machmer, like the Minchas Yitzchok, who required that you should table plastic without a bracha. Okay, but there are many, most of the Minhagailim, many Rabbanim allow plastic to be used without tabling. Okay, but if it's metal, it's mechuyev and tvila d'oraisa. If it's glass, it's mechuyev tvila midrabanan. But you make a bracha when you table glass. It's mechuyev and tvila. You're not allowed to use a keli that's not been tabled. And the whole idea that you can use a keli one time without tabling it is a misconception. It's not true. People get mixed up. It says modern Hebrew, you call it disposable keli, a keli chad pami, a one-time keli. So people think it means chad pam echad. You're allowed to use it. One time you're allowed to use it. No, it's not true. A disposable keli, you don't need to table because it didn't have a regular keli. But if it is a regular keli, you can't use it the first time either. So it's an issue. So you go to somebody's house, bigger bias, and they give you a cold drink in a glass. Now what do you do? So it's a problem. It's a problem. If it's a solid food, so let's say they gave you the grapes on a treifa plate. So the grapes on a treifa plate, so although if the plate absorbed with heat, okay, whether shaykh a plate should absorb with heat or not, okay, let's say they use the plate sometimes to cover a pot. In any case, let's say the plate absorbed bacham, and the grapes are wet. So then the Ramah, he needs, you have Tartil Reis over here, but the Shach allows it, the Alter Rebbe allows it. But you have another problem with the Tevilas Kalim. So you got out of problem number one, you got a problem number two. You only use them by Fanarai, and it's not a Dover Chadif. But what about the dinner Tevilas Kalim? So the Posh Teitza for that is you take the grapes, and not treif, you take the grapes and you just put it on the table first, and then you take it off the table. You can do this without people noticing also. As long as it's solid food, you can do that. No, they're going to give you a cold piece of chicken. It's going to be a little more difficult. But if it's a solid food, it's not a problem. But this doesn't really work, obviously, with a liquid. What are you going to do with the liquid? So then that's an issue. So you should avoid this by asking for plastic, and that's the easiest way to do it. I heard a very interesting heter. I didn't see it inside, but I heard that Reb Shlomo Zalman said that if you have a case, it's going to put somebody to shame. It's shasat chagodl. He said, so what are you going to do with such a liquid? You got to pour it out of the glass. Right? If the glass wasn't tabled, somebody put it by mistake and say, hey, what are you pouring water in that glass? The glass wasn't tabled, can't use it. So how are you going to correct the situation? What are you going to do? No, what are you going to do? You're going to pour it out. Okay, so you don't have to pour it out to your mouth. To me, it doesn't make sense, but I heard such a shmuel from Shlomo Zalman, so I really wouldn't rely on that. You should, you should avoid that lechatchila. Now, one last thing on this.
What do they do at chasanas?
What do you mean?
With the glass thing, they're not talking.
So first of all, you have the kosher kitchens. You have also different policies in the kashrus agencies, but these are dinim and tevilas kalim. Then you have a keli shel schera, if the thing is only rentals b'chlal. If you have a goyish place that has kosher rentals, you have goyish companies that rent kalim, and they have a hechsher for part of their business. And that's under lock and key, and only the mashgiach has the keys, and everything's washed separately, and everything is kept separately. Those don't need to be tabled because the keli shel goy it's owned by a goy, doesn't need to be tabled b'chlal. So too, if it's a goyish owned hotel, in some places will table them, and you have other places will go on the heter that the restaurant or caterer, these sort of places also it's a klei shel schera, and it's not really being used for eating by the owner. Is not using it for eating. He's using it he rents it out together with the food, and they find a heter based on that. And there are different practices in different situations. Okay, the last din you see highlighted over here in the yellow. Afilu kadeir shel cheres. So why would you think kadeir shel cheres is more strict? Because we see the Alter Rebbe is more strict. Although mitzad the din, there are those poskim that say you're not allowed to use a kli cheres. Kli cheres has many different chumras over other kelim. You have even chumas. If it's a kli cheres yeshaver, it says that absorb the taste of chatas, and you can't get the taste out by kashering it. You cannot do hagalas kelim on a kli cheres, and therefore the taste of the carbon that was absorbed inside became neisar after the time passes, and therefore you have to break the kelim. But the Alter Rebbe says over here that if it's cold, you're allowed to use the afilish kadeir shel cheres. Shnizbashel by chametz kol hashana. Okay, it absorbed with heat. Dailei badach lishtamish v'tzenim b'pesach mikradin. Mikradin, even a kli cheres you're allowed to use. Now Alter Rebbe puts in brother. Avla minig u'shleishtamish klal b'pesach b'kli cheres yeshanim afilu b'tzein. Even if it's cold, the minig is you don't use a kli cheres. That's the minik, but mitzad ikaridin, it's not a problem. So it ends up being, are you allowed to use a treifa keli b'shas adchak? So as long as not beifin kavu and as long as not a davar charif, so then you're allowed to do it, even if it's a kli cheres, even if it's wet, and even if absorbed al dechamin, as long as you make sure it's clear. Okay, go to the chat for some questions. How are you magder mashke charif? You mean how much percentage alcohol? I mean, most bottles of alcohol are 40%, 40% alcohol, 80 proof is 40% is l'kaim l'shaylas dover charif. Is wine also charif? The poskim do not consider wine to be a dover charif, although they say the Jamke Morozov olav shalom, famous sheikhet in Montreal, his wine was shayla how much alcohol there was in such wine, but normally wine is not a dover charif. When you need to wipe to ensure it's clean enough, it looks clean, you need to wipe it yourself. That's a good question. That's a good question. There are other ones also good questions, but that is a good question. I would have to look inside whether a visual inspection is enough. Even ufik, I don't see why not, but I'm not sure. I would want to look inside for that. Okay. Let's just do, before we take a break, we'll just do Sif Gimel is pretty simple, and we already discussed it earlier about taking bread off the table. This was a Talmud Yerushalmi. If you recall, and we mentioned over there, I mentioned the Berel brings down from Yerushalmi about not using the leftover bread from the milchik meal for the fleishik meal and vice versa. And he mentioned over there that we'll see it in Tzadik Aleph, and we got there. Yeah, this is Sif Gimel Tzarich Lizar Shelo Yiga Bosor B'Lechem. You have to make sure that the meat does not touch the bread. Then you're not going to be able to use that bread together with cheese. If it touched, you're not allowed to have a basar. And we learned even more. So that's what said in Yerushalmi, that the leftover pieces of bread on the table, you have to take off the table. And I believe I mentioned briefly, if you make sure that you don't touch it with flesh of your hands and it doesn't touch the meat and so on and so forth from a Shabbos meal. And the best thing, if you even put it back into the bag, so then there'd be no problem to use it for a grilled cheese sandwich on Sunday. But if with the leftover challah, but if it was on the table and it was on the table together with basar, if you took it off the table during the fish course and you put it away before the chicken soup came out, so then again it's not a problem. But otherwise it would be a problem. So Rabbi says the Rabbi writes in Igros Meisha that the slices are a problem, but the big piece of bread is normally not a problem. We don't expect that would have come in contact with meat, and it's not an issue. In the chat, la'alacha, can use a glass cup with cold water when you visit a non-frum yid. You have a problem with agalos kalim, with tefillas kalim. So you should use I would not rely on this heter. It's only a shmur. I didn't really look for it. But I guess I should do my homework and look up and see whether he actually says such a thing. But it's taka problem. So Shach writes, so we learned Sif Aleph and base. You're not allowed to use it, but it needs hadacha. So the Shach says, do hadacha. Come on, what kind of hadacha? You do hadacha on lechem. What kind of hadacha on lechem? First of all, who says it's going to be edible after you do hadacha? But also, can you really do hadacha on lechem? You do hadacha on lechem. Is that going to rinse off? If you have a remnant of meat that's on the lechem and you're going to put it under the tap and run water, what's going to happen to the leftover meat? It's just going to get absorbed into the bread. It can get absorbed into the challah. You didn't make it ois fleishik. It doesn't rinse. It has something on the external surface of a fruit, a raw piece of meat, some milk, something like that. You rinse it and get it off, but not something which is absorbent like this. So the Piskei Tshuva, it has a problem with the shachs. He says the shachs must be talking about the crust. So so it fell on the crust. No. So the crust, you can get it off the surface, you can rinse it off. But on the soft part of the bread, then you have to scrape it off because you have to get off the mamashas. And you should do that without doing hadacha. The hadacha is not a chumrah. The hadacha is going to mess everything up because it's just going to cause it to be absorbed. Okay, so I think we're going to take a break now. Let me just check over here, see if they have in their parparois lachachma something that I skipped. I think we pretty much covered everything here. So we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll do Sif Dalit. So the time now, just 1 second. Time now is 8:23. So in Mirz Hashem, 8:33, we shall reconvene. Look like on the recording. It's an interesting thing that the B'chal, you have the Alter Rebbe says in Hilchos Talmud Torah that what's the whole Aveda of Birur of Limra Torah B'chal Limra Anigla, that you have a Gemara and you have a Raminhu, and you have two Baraises, and the two Baraises are saying the opposite. And what's the Aveda of Birurim that takes place through Limra Torah? You have that's a B'medvar Mamburim. What this one is talking about this case, and this one talking about the other case. Sometimes you have it's Muchach Meteche, which what's being talked about. So I didn't really see it discussed, but you have, for example, the Gemara Pesachim talking about matzah. So what's unique about matzah? Matzah is dry. It's not cold. It's dry. So it's not only dry. It's not really shayach. I mean, once it's a matzah ball, it's not matzah anymore, right? So kneidlach is not matzah. So it's sort of muchach, that pirush, to a certain extent from within the context. But a lot of cases you don't, but you just have to find a way to differentiate. And sometimes there's really no remez even. There's not even a hint to the difference between the cases, but you have to find some way you have to find to differentiate between the cases. And yeah, so, who says there's a difference between the two? So I gave you one example, whether that's a good example or it's not a good example, a good explanation. But as I said, you see that Ramah himself was not satisfied with it, and certainly other Naisikalim were not. Okay, so let's move on to Sif Dalit. So share the screen, and now we're going to Sif Dalit. Now we're talking about heat. Talking about cases where things are hot. So let's make this into full screen here. There we go. Okay, so what happens when they're both hot? And what happens if one of them is hot? So that's one thing we need to look at. We also need to look at the situation. Where is this taking place? So how is it being heated up? So is it being heated up through bishul when they're both hot? So obviously, if you're heating up both of them in a pot together through bishul, they're both becoming hot. But if it's tzli, is there any difference when in the case of tzli? So if you have, for example, a piece of meat that's barbecuing, and then, excuse me, got to do my muting job over here again. Okay, you don't have to show, unless it's disturbing the learning. Okay. So if it's tzli, that has a different din. Bishul, we assume the tam goes all the way through, and tzli is not like that. So even if they're both hot, we have to look and see what's the tzura. Or they're both hot and they're just sitting on the table and they touch each other. What exactly is happening here? And we also need to look, mikum, what is the physical location between the two things? Basically, if you have them, you can have them next to each other and touching. You can have one on top of the other. Now, when one is on top of the other, where's the hot one? One is hot, one is cold. So is the tachten reseyach or is the tachten seinen? And as we'll see from the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, we're mainly interested in what is the temperature of the one on the bottom. And we'll soon see where that comes from. Okay, but first let's get clear. The din of bishul, we're not talking about in this simon. When it's talking about two things being hot, we're not talking about here we have a pot of meat and then some cheese fell in. That's not what we're talking about, because atam is pasha bako. Then it goes all the way through. So there, we're not talking about hadach is not going to help. A piece of cheese fell in over here to a hot pot and became heated up, and you do hadach on it. It's not going to do. That's going to be a problem. And what about the meat in the pot? You can take everything in this pot and rinse it off and then eat it. No, it ain't shishim hakol nasa. If there's no shishim, there's no bittul b'shishim. So then the whole thing becomes usher, since it's in a pot and there's liquid. So we assume that that liquid facilitates the transfer of the taste from the food throughout the entire pot. However, if it's sli or a fia, and it's just out in the open like this, let's just talk about this for one more second. Here we have a bunch of liquid over here. Now, when you have some milk fell into this side, the left-hand side of the pot, okay, is there going to be more milchik taste on the left side of the pot than the right side of the pot? So the fact is that right the moment when it happened, probably yeah. Okay, but after a while, it's going to travel throughout the entire pot. It's eventually going to become mispashet, and halachically, it's considered to be mispashet right away, because once things are hot and the yatz ledispe, even though the mamashas, if you will be able to dye it or something like that and maintain its color, and you will be able to see it gradually spreading out throughout the pot, but the tam goes right away. The tam gets in general evenly spread through the whole thing. Whereas if you have a piece like this sitting on the barbecue, okay, this is still cold on the top, but let's say the piece on the left over here is already hot, looks like it's more cooked, and then some milk falls on one end of it. Okay, so the question is, does it penetrate from the top of the piece to the bottom of the piece? Does it go all the way from the right side or to the left side? So we say as follows. I mean, here you have on the left, you have some shish kebabs. Each one is an individual piece. So they're touching. It hit one piece. Does it go all the way to all the other pieces automatically? What's the din? So we look at a few factors. Factor number one, if it's a davar shamin, if there's fat, if it's fatty meat, hakol nesar. Okay. Now, let me just talk about this for one other second before we learn the parentheses. When you say that the food that fell in becomes distributed, that is mispashet in the entire pot, in the case of bishul, that has a kula and a chumrah. Okay, the chumrah is, if there's no shishim, then it asks the whole pot. Okay, the kula is that you can use the entire pot to be mevatel that b'shishim. Okay, now let's say you have a davar shamin and a drop of milk falls on the piece, okay, and it's less than shishim. So we say if it's a davar shamin, if it's a fatty piece of meat, it's going to spread throughout the entire chatich. It's going to spread throughout the entire thing. So therefore, we're not going to answer the entire chatich. What about the spot where it fell? This idea that we say it's a davar shamin, if it's not a davar shomen, then we only answer the place where it touches. You see on the left-hand side, if they're dry pieces, the place where it touched, you take off 2 centimeters. You cut off 2 centimeters where it touches, you take kadei netila, that you throw out, and the rest of the piece is mutter. Now, over here was a davar shomen, and now we're going to say that it answers the entire piece. That's a chumrah, yeah, because if there's no shishim, then it answers the entire piece. It's spread through the entire piece. Whereas if it was dry, then that wouldn't happen. But is it lakula also? Do we say that the place where it fell is not more, quote unquote, usher than the rest of it? We say, no, this is only lechumra. We say lechumra will spread throughout the entire amount, but you're not going to get out of taking kadei netila. That's the parentheses now. You still have to take netila. Okay, so even if it's davar kachel, you would make netila. The fact that the shuman, that the fat in the meat cause it to spread throughout the whole thing, doesn't mean it gets evenly distributed. The fat is also not evenly distributed. Okay, so that's what it says Shulchan Aruch, the difference in a davar shaman and a davar she'ein shaman. But the problem is, the Ramah says we are not baki. And what's the dividing line between shaman and kochosh? Now, if you have something that's not shaykh, it should be a davar shaman, like a matzah. A matzah, we don't say we're not baki. Maybe this is a fat piece of matzah. So we say, chel of chita, but that's not what it means. It's not called the fatty piece of meat. Doesn't mean it's davar shum. It means that it grew very well. So matzah, lechem, it's not shaykh that it should be a davar shum. You have you're grilling peppers, barbecuing peppers, vegetables. It's not shaykh the whole musuk. But if you have something like meat or you have something like cheese, there's a high fat content in cheese. So then we say normally we're not baki. We say we don't have expertise to differentiate between something which is yes shaman, not shaman. With chalib itself, whether you call it dover shaman, is a whole discussion in the poskim. All of these are a whole discussion in the poskim, and you have to look in nachreinim if there's a case that you're not sure about, because this we're not baki is used many times in Shulchan Aruch, and then we say we're not baki, but to a certain extent, just because we're not baki doesn't mean we're total batlonim. I mean, we know that a matzah is not a dover shaman. We don't go so far. I mean, all the places today are checking chickens for tzumas agidin. It's a treifus in the chickens. And it says Shulchan Aruch, we're not baki and checking tzumas agidin. So what's the heter? So the heter is, they say that we're baki to recognize a shayla, whether it's a shayla or not a shayla. Once we know it's a shayla, we're not baki to pass in the shayla, but we're enough baki to tell what's a shayla or not. So like we're not baki, but yeah, Aif is certainly shayach shemnunis. Chicken fat. Schmaltz, how we live without schmaltz. Yeah. Okay. Whether you would take a piece of schnitzel that has no skin on it, one can make an argument that's not a dover shaman, but it is shaykh b'shimnunis, and that would definitely be a shaykh. Okay, so now let's talk about the first case. We're going to talk about when they're both hot. So here we have the case where it's a pat, and here we discussed this is the basic din. Im yeshishim keneged some gevina fell into the pat. So if you have shishim, then hakol mutter. Hakol mutter doesn't mean that the cheese is mutter. It means that if the meat, what's falling in over here? I see some meat sitting in the pot over here. So the piece that fell in is going to absorb, okay? But the rest of the pot is going to be mutter. So if it was less than shishim, so whatever fell in is not going to answer the pot. But im aim shishim keneged gevina. So gevina, I guess, fell into the pot here. I was expecting a piece of gevina to fly into the pot.
It never says anywhere, but in the past, that you have to right away grab it and pull it out.
We're going to get to that later. With whoa, yeah, grabbing it and taking it out and stirring it. Yeah, we're going to have a whole discussion later on about that. Good. Again, this is for purposes of contrast. Okay, you're 100% right. There are many, many details about this din on the right that we're going to get to later on. So Mitzadik base is going to have a whole discussion about that. But just to contrast that this is not what we're talking about. We're not talking over here about Kedei Natila and Klippa and these sort of things. We're talking about either it's us or it's mutter. So im ein shishim keneged gevina. So some gevina fell inside. You even see the slide over here. I didn't make these slides, but this is taken from Tzimah Kufay and Hilchas Taruvas. This, okay. So if you don't have shishim, if some gevina fell in, it's a fleisha kapara. I guess that's this silhouette of the piece of meat inside to tell you it's a fleisha soup, fleisha maichel, and some cheese fell inside. So if you don't have shishim, that the meat inside was not 60 times more the cheese that fell in, so then the whole thing is possible chalav gendik, the whole thing is also ba'ano. But if there is shishim, so then keneged gevina against the cheese that fell in, so then the pot's going to be mutter. That doesn't mean you can eat the gevina. You should take the gevina out, okay? Because there's more than 60 times meat against the cheese. There's not more than 60 times cheese against the meat. So the cheese absorbed tam bosor. So the cheese you got to get rid of. But if it's still recognizable, at least if it didn't dissolve, if it's cheese, not milk. If it's milk, not cheese, you can still recognize. You take it out. But it's not going to ask it a pot. But what happens if it's not in a pot? And some cheese that was hot ended up touching the meat that was hot. Okay, so since they're both hot, so then we're worried about the tam gevina going into the bosor, the tam bosor going into the gevina. Now, im yesh shishim keneged gevina. So let's say it's a small piece of cheese. Obviously, in this picture, there's no shishim. But let's say it should be a small piece of hot cheese fell onto a piece of meat. Somebody was eating pizza, and somebody else was eating meat, and a piece of hot cheese fell off the pizza and fell onto the piece of meat. What's the din? So the din is, If it was less than shishim, so yesh shishim means you have more than 60 times more meat than you have from the hot milchiks. So then the rest of the piece of meat is going to be mutter, and wherever it touched, sarich natila, you got to take off 2 centimeters. So if you have a thin piece of meat, you're out of luck. But if it's thicker than 2 centimeters, or at least you take it with 2 centimeters from that place, sarich natila. Okay, so they took natila from the place it touched, and that piece over there is going to be bosor b'chalav, and the rest of this piece of meat you can eat. But if it ain't shishim, they're not going to be in a hakalas. If you don't have bittul b'shishim, so then we assume we don't differentiate between a davar kochers and a davar shamin when it comes to a piece of meat. We're not bucky, and therefore we assume we went throughout the whole thing. And therefore, since you don't have shishim, so therefore the whole thing is aser. Now, the question is going to be, one is on top. The case I was describing was also one on top. Here you see they had this piece of cheese slide in from the side. Okay, and in any case, they're both hot, so it really doesn't make a difference. If they're both hot, it doesn't make a difference. So if they're both cold, we already spoke about that at the beginning of the simon. Okay, you do normally hadach. If they're both hot, so then we're back to the din of shishim. And if you do have shishim and you're going to allow the rest of it, you still have to take natila. The issue now is, what's the din when one is hot and one is cold? And that's what we're going to discuss now. Any questions on what we did so far?
Natila on the cheese also, or just on the shtickle flesh?
Both.
Yeah.
How can it be both? Then wouldn't the cheese be less than 60? If the cheese was less than 60 of the meat, then the cheese should be bad, no?
Oh yeah, so that would go through the whole thing. Again, if it's a davar sheshayich b'shem nunis, which a piece of cheese normally we say it is shayich b'shem nunis, then it would take a be aser. I'm trying to imagine a low-fat cheese. Today, like you have the milk, you got the 3% milk, and then you got the 2% milk, then you got the 1% milk, then you got the
powdered milk.
It's an interesting discussion whether powdered milk is considered perhaps l'kuli alma to be a davar shamin, because it has a much higher concentration of milk fat. The shaila is, if it's dry like that, did it dissolve? The lechluchis, if everything's dry. So the shach already said at the beginning of the simmers they're both dry, but then he was talking about whether it's cold.
But it's more like a solid fat, not a.
Yeah, solid fat. Solid fat. Once it melts, the fat on the meat is also solid fat.
You need shishim against the whole chaticha, or only the part where it touched?
So we say that if it's a davar shamin, you're going to take natila. If it would be a davar kochosh, the natila would be enough. But since we're not bucky, what's kochosh, what's shamin, so therefore we need shishim in the whole piece. Otherwise, we're going to ask the whole piece. The basic thing is that natila would be enough if it's not davar shamin. Just we're not bucky.
Right, but if there was reitiv or whatever, the whole chaticha can go. The time from the whole chaticha goes into everywhere. But over here, it's just a part where it's kedin natila is going across the whole.
Yeah, you're talking about whether the meat is kochosh or shamin.
Let's say it's shamin.
So shamin's going to go through the whole thing.
No, right, but is the whole piece of gavina going to go? The time from the whole gavina going to go into?
If they're both hot, then we assume that the whole thing goes in. The time from the whole thing goes in. There's no way to be mashayir. We're gonna have a whole discussion that later on a keli, where when you have a keli, where it might be possible. We'll discuss whether you have to measure against the whole keli. But when you're talking about a piece of food, it's one big piece of cheese, and if the whole thing is hot, if half of the cheese was hot and half of the cheese was cold, it'd be different, perhaps. But here we're talking about the whole thing is hot. And hot, by the way, the definition of hot is yatzalet. How much is yatzalet? It's a big machlekes, but l'chumra, we say there are days that say even 40 degrees, not very hot. People think that yatzalet is very, very hot. It's not so hot. But anyway, that's for kofeh, that's for taros. Let's go further. Okay, so here we have a famous Gemara. Itmar, cham l'tech cham Divrei hakol aser. In a case where there's no shisha. So you have one of them is hot and the other one is hot, both of them are hot. Everybody agrees it's going to be aser. And if both of them were cold, everybody holds that it's okay. You need hadacha, we learned, okay, but it's not going to answer anything more than just the mamashas you got to get off. But the food itself is not going to become aser. But if something hot fell into something cold, or vice versa, you have something cold fell into something hot, we have machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Rav Omer ilogovar. Rav says the one on top is the overpowering one. Shmuel Omer tato govar. And Shmuel says the one on the bottom is the overpowering one. Which means, let's read again the cases. If you have something hot that fell into something cold, what's Rav going to say? Rav says ilo govar. The one on top is hot, so therefore it's going to ask for the one that's on the bottom. On the other hand, the one on top was cold, so according to Rav, so then it's going to be okay. But according to Shmuel, and we pass on like Shmuel tatogovar, so if it's cham in the first case, you have something hot fell into something cold. You have a hot piece of meat fell into the dairy. So then we say tatogobar, the one on the bottom is cold. So therefore it's not going to answer everything. On the other hand, if the one on the bottom was hot, since Shmuel paskins tatogobar, and that's the halacha, so therefore the one on the bottom is going to answer the one on top. You want an easy way to remember, heat rises, so the one that's on the bottom is hot, it's going to answer the one on top. That's according to Shmuel. And then the Gemara brings Tanya Kavasi de Shmuel. It brings a Baraisa that paskins like Shmuel. And then it brings a second Baraisa that also paskins like Shmuel. And that's the reason Rashi points out, we have a cloud in the Gemara that says you have machlekes Rav and Shmuel that if it has to do with Isser, we paskin like Rav, and it has to do with Mammon, we paskin like Shmuel. So over here we're talking about Isser. So why are we paskin like Shmuel? That's the question that the Rashi is answering. That normally in something with Isser v'heter we paskin like Rav. In this case, the halacha like Shmuel. Why is that? The Hatanya Tarti Masnis and Kavasi Kedlakamen. Look a little further, and you see there are two brises that say according to Shmuel. So when you have two brises say like Shmuel, you have this Tanya Kavasi, and you have over here Tanya Idach. Both brises say the din like Shmuel. So it's not just a machlekes Rav and Shmuel anymore. Rav and Shmuel, Rav Taka Tana Upolig is sometimes considered to be a Tana, okay, but generally it's considered to be an Ameda. And even though Rav and Shmuel are Amoraim, but we have these stam brises that pass can clearly like Shmuel. So therefore, the halacha is like Shmuel. So we pass like Shmuel, and we say Tatogov. Agav, it's the Rosh explains why do we say halacha karav b'isur and halacha Shmuel b'moni? Because each one heard a lot of cases like this. So all the cases that had to do with the Isser, they used to go to Rav. So Rav developed the expertise in that area in halacha. And you have today in the medical field, you have specialists. You have to go to this specialist, that specialist. Each one, there's so much information. So each specialist has what's up to date in that particular part of the body or that particular field, whatever it is. And we see it's a svara. You see that over here. Dinah Mominus. Shmuel was always Isaac and Dinah Mominus. Versteht sich, the Rav could also paskin and din Mominus, and Shmuel could paskin and din Isveter. As you see right over here, and Imachlek Rav and Shmuel, both of them are talking about the case. But the Rosh says that's the reason why we pass in one case like Rav, the other case like Shmuel. So Allah Shmuel tato gomer. V'lochin im nafal tzeinel techam hakol aser. So you have something cold fell into something hot. It's all going to be aser. Yeah. Now feel kasher atachten tzeinen. Now what happens if the bottom one was cold? So we have another line in the Gemara. Right over here. Let's say something hot fell into something cold. So it says madiach. So all you have to do, l'chura, is just rinse it off. Even if it was tzayin el tech tzayin, you have to do hadacha that we learned earlier on in the sim. However, Gemara adds, kiven dechamhu, since the top is hot, so you want to say that it's like, since tato gavar, it's cold falling into cold, but it's not cold falling into cold, it's hot falling into cold. So eventually, tato gavar, and the cold on the bottom is going to cool off the piece on top. Okay, but that's going to take some time. So kiven dechamu ad meyaker le iafsher de lebal porta. That before it cools off, ad the maker until it gets cold, it's impossible that it shouldn't absorb a little bit. It's going to absorb a little bit. So clip a mere boy. So why does it say that it's no problem at all? You need clip. So elamas, you should say so therefore the Gemara is masakin, and you see the little base over here. So this is from the Ein Mishpat, which tells you the halacha is like that. Because we paskin that even though we say tato gava and the tzayin, the cold was on the bottom, and therefore it's not going to aser kule, but you still tzarech likleif makam mifkash beneim, the place where they touched, it's going to take some time before it cools off, and therefore it's going to absorb a little bit. And therefore you need to take kedei klippa. So if it's saying, then it's going to be good enough normally to do adach. But this we would imply that all you have to do is hadacha. Bemis is the Baraisa said that Tanya Kavasa Dishmul Chamatech Chamaser became saying Shanosan Latech Chamaser Chamatech Tzainim, but saying Latech Cham Nadiach. The Baraisa brings down hadacha. So this Itmar over here didn't bring down hadacha, even saying Latech Tzainim. So here it says that the hot fell into the cold or the cold fell into the cold, you need to do hadacha. Then the Gemara said Chamatech Tzainim Nadiach. How can you get by with hadacha? L'chor, it's going to absorb a little bit before it cools off. So then it fixes the gears of the Braisa and says that takatzayin techzayin madiach, but chama techzayin is kalif. You have to take kedei klip. Clear? So now we have a complete set of dinim, basically. So if they're both cham, so then you're going to need shishim. If they're both tzayin, it's good enough hadacha. Since it's tato gavar, if it's hot in the bottom, so then also it's going to spread through the whole thing. And if it's chamotech tzainen, so then you're going to need clip. Okay. So now let's illustrate these cases over here. So here on the right hand side, it's a hot pot of milk, and on the left hand side, it's a cold pot of milk. They both have bubbles, but one of them, the one on the right, is hot. And now we're going to have a piece of meat is going to fall into the hot pot. So what's the din? No? Anybody? What's the din?
If that meat fell into either of those pots?
Yeah, milk fell into the right-hand pot.
Then it's all right.
Okay, what's going to be with the meat? The meat fell into boiling milk. What's with the meat? Meat was cold.
The meat is usher, but the
meat is also. What's with the milk?
If there's shishim against the meat, then it's
okay. Is it going to be okay? Yeah.
Does it make a difference if the meat is reiseach or not? Or
somebody had fun making these things over there. So Bosor also. And the chalav is aser. Elim yeshishim. Can I get a bosor? If you have shishim against the bosor, so then the bosor, the piece of bosor, you're gonna have to take out. But the milk is gonna be mutter.
If the bosor was reiseach, would be the same din, no?
Excuse me.
If the bosor was reiseach.
That's what we say. Tato, but since it's tato gover, there's no difference between chamut techam or tzayin techam.
Okay.
That's exactly the principle of tato gavar. We don't differentiate. According to so with Paskin like Shmuel, since it's tato gavar, then this is considered to be a case of chamut techam. That's exactly what you talk over. You're 100% right. Now, let's say it was the other way around. Let's say the meat was hot and the milk was cold and it fell in. Okay, so what did the Gemara say?
Klipa,
Clip on what?
the Bosor.
Okay, if they clip on the Bosor. So you're gonna take off an outer layer of the Bosor. What's with the milk?
Also, could they klipa?
Oh. So you're gonna say that the hot meat, before it got cooled off, it absorbed tam cholav. Now you want to tell me that the milk absorbed tam basar? Because
You
it
have
was
to be
still hot,
Mashire if
because
the Klipa of the entire Bosor is more than Shishim is a 1/60th.
You're pointing out a very, very big problem. We're gonna have a whole discussion about this because it's not so easy to take clip off milk. Mela would be a piece of cheese. No, but milk, a liquid, what clipper? Is it shaykh? The whole thing clipper. So the basar needs clipper. What's with the challah? What's with the challah? So we're gonna fall into an whole big machlekes about what is with the challah. But I first want to discuss two ideas. So since we're discussing ideas, I'm going to take this off. Okay. First of all, what kind of machlek is this that took over? L'chura, what does it mean? The taste is going to go from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top? I don't understand. Taste it and see what's going on. Take two parva foods with different tastes, and you'll see what it tatok over, log over. What kind of shayla is it? Give it to kfela arma. The Gemara says, give it a goyre taste, and you say, did the taste at the bottom will go into the top, or the taste at the top go into the bottom? What kind of machlek is this? Did we discuss anything like this before? Because this is a shayla in many different places in Allah. We have machlekes where the glass is by layer. Is glass, does it absorb time? We have machlekes. Is it yeshem or not? And then we have machlekes, even according to the day that says it absorbs. Can you get the taste out? Machlekes says one day it says you can do hagol and the taste comes out. The other says the hagol doesn't taste. So today, it's a machlekes and metzias. It's machlekes and metzias. What's going on? So the emes is the kasha of it's a machlekes and metzias. So this is a little bit of a maimar of muska. But the way the Rebbe learns the whole concept of machlekes and metzias is I'm not going to say unique in the sense that there's nobody else that says like this, but in general, that's not the way it's interpreted machlekes and metzias. The Rebbe, all the sichos, when he speaks about machlekes and metzias, at Seichen Su to the Steichemet, you look in the Steichemet, it's nothing like the cases that the Rebbe brings. The Rebbe takes it's like pshuta shel mikra in halacha. That everything that it says, you see, b'chava the Rebbe, everything's like this. Like somebody who said the Rebbe had the geinas from the rest of the geinim and the emunah of a poshta yidna. You know, like some old bubby in the shtetl over there. It's a emunah pshuta. So that this is what it says in Teres Hamas. This is what it says. So it says this is Teres Hamas. How is it going to fit together? We have to figure out. How could one say like this and one say not like that? It's a kenishzon. So Rebbe always found a derech in the cases. I remember there was a whole series of Fabrengens once, and I remember thinking about Fabreng. Okay, how's it ever going to get out of this one? It's mamesh stirum. Can't be. And Rebbe always found a way to say that they were agreed on the metzias and they were arguing about a halacha. But you look in the original Steichemet, he doesn't take it to such an extreme. So l'chora today, there's all discussion today whether our taste of sense of taste is niskalkal and we can't taste. But back then they were able to taste. Maybe the kalim is stainless steel, different. Whole discussion today why it is we don't taste like we used to. But l'chora, when you're talking about food, certainly you have an inyan tam. Can you taste it? Can you not taste it? But pashtus, and there's something like this concept you see in Crazy Place. He brings down a similar concept that everybody agrees. I'm saying b'derech yesh leimer. I'm not saying this. This is not. I'm just telling you what I remember sitting those Fabring, and so I'm just imagining that the Luchor fits such a teretz. What's pshat? So Mechaber says glasses doesn't absorb taste, and the Rama says glass absorbs taste. What's pshat? Pshat absorbs does not. So the pshat is everybody agrees that the glass absorbs a little bit. Chaber and both agree. The shaila is, does that have a chshivas enough to answer a keli? That's a shaila in halacha. Ad mosai. How, to what extent does it have to absorb until we say it is considered to be a mitzvah? And al derech zeh, when you have the cold into the hot into the cold, some taste is going to go from top to bottom. Some taste is going to go one direction. Some taste is going to go the other direction. Some taste is going to go from the tato to the tato to the ilo, and some taste can go from the ilo to the tato. The shaila is which type of taste has the halachic significance. So according to Shmuel tato, according to Rabbi, ilo gover. Okay, so again, it's hard for us to imagine exactly how this works. But let's talk about the case where you have the chamlutech tzeinen. So the Gemara says that. First, the Braisa said hadacha, just like cold into cold, and then it said no, it's impossible. By the time it cools off, it's going to take some time, so you have to take klipa. So what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Does that mean that we know that cham l'tech tzeinen is always going to aser mamish kadei klipa? That kadei klipa is mamish aser, or we're chayshish. We're chayshish that the thing was hot. And it's going to take a while till it cools off. So Mustaber Tzazagan to say that it absorbs some. So to make sure we take kedei klipa and we're safe. In other words, what's the din of that kedei klipa? What's going to be the din b'diavad with that klipa? Or we're going to answer it b'diavad that the iser, we say that you have to take klipa. You have to take klipa to be safe. And who says it's mamish or iser like any other iser? Or do we say no, it's iser like any other iser? And that is not so clear from the Gemara, and that's why you're going to see in Nachreinim what's going to be the case of the b'diavad. B'diavad it also needs a definition. What's going to be b'diavad? This piece got mixed up with other pieces. It fell into a pot, or it's something that you can't do klippa, like the liquid. You can't do klippa. You also understand that the klippa, when you have a solid piece and it's sitting now in the milk, so it's totally surrounded by the milk, but the milk is a moving target. When the Bosor falls into the chalav, so if you need some time, until it cools off, it's going to absorb. So you're going to say vice versa. So too, that piece of meat is going to heat up the chalav. Who says it's going to heat up the chalav? The chalav is not the chalav where the meat hit gets pushed away to the back. It's liquid. It's you have a whole discussion in Taz. In the din of kisi adam, what happens when dam? You have dam parv, dam asoyer. It gets mixed together. Do we say you have kisi adam? You have a whole bunch of dam. So here, this bird is over. The blood is sitting on this side, and this was sitting on that side, and you have a whole pile of blood, and you put some offer on one part of it. You cover the whole thing. But do we say if it's lach balach, the whole thing gets mixed together? And this is I don't want to go on a tangent. There's a whole discussion when you have today a vat, a cheese vat, for example, that you're cooking it, and there's a steam jacket surrounding the whole vat, and you're heating up the cheese to a temperature just under Yad Saled's place. You don't have to kasher the vat. So there are days that want to say, yeah, it's true that the temperature of the cheese in the middle of the vat is not Yad Saled's way, but since you have steam, that steam is a lot more than Yad Saled's way. The steam is over boiling point. Okay, so right next to the wall, we have to worry that it's going to kedei klipa. Or do we say that since the whole liquid is all circulating in the thing, that it's not just heating up that kedei klipa the part? And this is a machlekes and haitik apaskim. You have different hashkachas treated differently. This question, but certainly you can see whatever the final halacha might be. You see, it's certainly not clear from the Gemara, and we have machlekes achreinim about it. But also the way you're going to treat it and what's going to be the halacha is going to be guided by how it is you're looking at this clip. Okay, so that with those two akdamas. So now we're going to talk about this ma din hacholaf. What's going on with the cholaf? We're gonna have to move a little faster through here because time is okay. I think we should be okay. Should finish on time. Okay, so this is you have Sif Dalet. So in the case where you have again chamotech tzeinin, so you have this hot piece of meat on the right hand side is falling onto a piece of cheese. So then it's going to be pretty clear. You know what's going to be what's going to be the story in this case. So just like the meat is going to absorb some of the taste of the cheese because it's still hot, so too, since it's going to take some time before it cools off, the cheese is going to absorb some of the taste of the meat. So you take the klippa from the point of contact of the bosor, and you take the klippa from the point of contact of the cheese. The problem is weiter, like we said, you have now milk. It's not shayach to take the klippa from the milk. So now, what are we going to do? So as a bosor, yesh likle. That's it clear in the Gemara. But what do you do with the cholav? It's a machlekes. Do we say b'diavad that something is not shaykh by klippa? Just forget about it. You don't have to worry about kadei klippa. Or do we say you have to worry kadei klippa? And this is a machlekes in Bali Atesus. You look on this Amud of Gemara, and there's a machlekes between the Rabbeinu Tam and the Riva. Rabbeinu Tam paskins that it's not a problem, not shaykh by klippa. And that can be there's nothing you can do. You can't take klippa from it. So if it was cheese, you take klippa. But if it's the meat, you can't take it like klippa. So we're good. So nothing. You can drink the whole milk. But the Riva says no. You have to take it like klippa. So you can't take it like klippa. Be mashayir. How much is it to take klippa? So if this milk fell into other milk, or if you're worried, you have to be mavatal at klippa b'shishim. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, you don't have to be mavatal to the shishim either. But just because you can't measure it, so who cares? You can't measure it. You still should worry about it. So that's why you have Achrein the Ramaz with this machlekes between the Paleatesis. The Riva is also in the Paleatesis. That the Riva is in the Tesis. So what's the machlekes? The machlekes is this din of klippa mamish iser mamish. So according to the Riva, it's iser mamish. So even if you can't take klippa, so you have to be mashayir, you still have to measure it and see whether you can treat it as if it's aser and make the calculation. How are you going to make this calculation? There's another discussion. Okay, but you do have to treat it as something with the klippa as mamish iser. We're according to Rabbeinu Tam, what's pshat he's not worried about. It's not worried about the whole thing is bechal. I say that's one of the hesbedim that you have for that for the das Rabbeinu Tam that we're not really concerned about. So now we'll see what does the Shulchan Aruch say about this. This was all akdama. We should understand Sif Dalet. Just by the way, I think you're getting the point from now, and I hope you're all getting the point because the way that we're giving the shiurim is we give the background first to the din, and then when you look at the Shulchan Aruch, you understand what it is you're looking at. When you learn Torah Beis Yosef, it's the same thing. Especially if you learn from the Gemara, it's even more. Here we're taking out a couple of shuras of Gemara and what's necessary from the background, and then the Shulchan Aruch, the way we were learning when I was in 7th grade, you start from the Shulchan Aruch. So you start from Shulchan Aruch, and then you see the Shachan Taz who will explain to you how the background reflects on the Shulchan Aruch. So it's almost like learning backwards. Chronologically, it's learning correctly, but if you don't have the background to understand, so the Shachan Taz are almost always going back to the sources of the Shulchan Aruch and determining what needs to be adjusted or added or subtracted, whatever the case is, according to the previous Makedis. Now you go into this, the Shulchan Aruch, after you have the backgrounds, poshet saleicht, and you see what's going on. So what do Mechaber say? Bosor v'cholav reischin shenisar v'yachad. If you have hot meat and hot milk that got mixed together, so the first case is the din of chamutecham, and even a tzeinin l'tzeicham, that the bosor was cold and it fell into hot milk, which means that the cholav was on the bottom. That it's still the hot one was on the bottom, but the first case is the hot one on the bottom was milk, and here the hot one on the bottom was meat. Same case. All those three cases are logically identifiable. Hakol also mishum datato gover. Paskan like Shmuel. So there's no difference cham techam or tzeinul techam. It doesn't matter what's on top is fleishik, milchik. You go after the one on the bottom. cold into hot is the same as hot into hot. Fine. Avol, what if it's the other way around? The one on the bottom is cold. If you have hot milk, which is on the top, that fell on top of a cold piece of meat, or you have a hot, just gotta hit the mute button again. Excuse me. Or you have a hot piece of meat, that the one, the cold on the bottom was milk. You have to take one layer off of the Bosor, and that becomes prohibited, and the rest of the Bosor is okay. I'll skip that for a second. B'chalav mutar kuli, and the milk is mutar. We're not worried about the milk. And here you see the Maram Kemis, Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, V'imnov was finished Machaber, V'imnov Zel Tech Zet Sein and Madech Bosor mutar. And if the both of them are cold, you do Adacha. Now we already knew from earlier in the Siman, and that is all the cases that we had in the Gemara that we just quoted in the Braisa, and passing like Rabbeinu Tam. So the milk is not shaykh to do kedei klippa from the milk, says Rabbeinu Tam, and that's it. So you have to take kalif, the Braisa says. So the kalif is talking about the meat. Obviously, kalif is not shaykh by milk. So from this, we say that you don't have to worry about klippa. Now the Taz is going to bring up this riva. Says good. Rabbeinu Tam says like that, but the riva has a point. Machnish Wissendik from the milk over here. What's going on? You don't have to worry about the milk, but we'll get to that soon. According to the Ritva, you mean the riva, yeah? The milk needs to be 60 to the klippa of the meat, or the milk would be also. What we're talking about over here is the milk becoming aser. So we're saying now that milk to aser the rest of the milk. Fine. So
She's saying this. You're saying so the 60 of the milk will aser the rest. The 60 of the clip. Of the milk will aser the rest of the milk in the.
The thing is that since Tatok Gaber, it's not going to spread. The tam is not going to spread through the rest of the milk. So the tam basar is only going to affect kedei klippa of the milk. Okay. The problem now is that milk, since it's liquid, is going to mix up with the rest of it. So do we need shishim against the kedei klippa of the milk? Okay, so that's our case over here. Here we have this meat fill into the milk. That's what the Machaber paskins. Okay, now this thing, that's the machlekes. So on the right, and that's Tesus Rambam. We don't need to start measuring. But the Riva holds a chalav mutar akasher yeshish and connected a klippish of basar. So the klippish that aser kedei klippa of that milk, which became aser, you need shishim against that. And this we have a machlek shachantas. So the Shulchan Aruch, and you see the Ramah doesn't disagree. If the Ramah disagreed, the Machaber, you see where it's underlined in red over here. The Machaber is a chalav mutar kule. So he holds its mutter. If the Ramah disagreed, he'd have to say something. So the Ramah also agrees with this. And the Shach brings many rayas why it's like that. However, the Mashal paskins like the Riva, and the Taz also paskins like this Mashal, like the Riva, and he requires shishim against the chol. Now, when you look in your chayveres over here, so there's something, if anybody knows the answer to my, I don't know why it is that I can't figure this out, but if you look on page 49 of Chaveres, so it has first and then Bosor Shnevel HaCholov, okay, and it talks about the the din of taking klippa from the Bosor. Din chalav tzenish novel take Bosor asayach. You have, that's our case we're talking about over here. So you have cold milk that fell into Bosor asayach. So he brings down the machlekes poskim, and he brings down the shach is mekel like Rabbeinu Tam, the Taz is machmer like the Rabbi. Then he writes over here in the bold, I don't know if you have the Chaveres in front of you, it's in the middle of page 49. L'maisa koz of a kitzer shulchan aruch siman gimel dalet hey. Shabbos reisech shnafel l'chalav. What's the final din in this machlekes shach and Taz? Pagam v'af shemikar adin nitten l'kolfei mikrim rabim yesh l'zokar l'gabri. Okay, fine. That we're going to see later on Sibzayin. But l'gabe chalav yesh lahachmi. Shetzorach shishim kenegar aklipa shesaviv habosa v'rak b'makom hefsaburu b'yesh laka. So he's bringing down that lechatchila you do like the Taz, and you need shishim against the klippa, but b'makom hefsab meruba you can be makel like the Shulchan Aruch that I'm on the shach. Now, I'm not sure where this hachra is coming from, because I haven't gone that deeply into it. And you also understand this is not a shaila that happens every day. There's shailas that come up which are very rugged. This is not the sort of shaila that people normally ask. I mean, something like this, first of all, how often does it happen? And second of all, if it does happen, come in the balabas, they're going to throw the whole thing away. I mean, it's gone. It's not like you imagine your average balabas that they start doing on dach on a piece of meat and taking the clip and eating the rest of the piece of meat. A hot piece of meat fell into milk. It's not the sort of it's not your everyday shayla, put it that way. So but according to the brief research I did, it seems to me most of the poskim hold like the shach, but I don't know what this means. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This is not the regular Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Siman Gimel is about the Levishus Begodim. So if somebody could enlighten me, I found an Eitzar HaChachma sefer called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch on Hilchas Bosor B'Cholov, but it's not that either, because there's no sif hay, and that's sim and gimel. So I don't know. So if anybody could enlighten me, I guess maybe I'm going to contact the one that wrote the kuntras, where it is that this hachra comes from. But the reason I'm mentioning it, you're going to have a bechina administered by them. So you have to know it says nachaveres, they paskin lechatchila, like the Taz, and say makom hefsem meruba like the shach. Questions? So that would be the correct answer. The correct answer is the machlekes Rishayim, machlekes Rabbeinu Tam Riva, or Teisus Rambam Riva, wherever you want to put it. And according to that is machlekes Shach and Taz. The Shulchan Aruch and Ramah also paskin like the Shach. And it says in the Chaveres the lechatchili do like the Taz and have some do like the Shach. Fine. Last case. What about the Bosor who's b'diavad? Makom shabasor tzorech klipa. So you were supposed to take Kedei Klippa from the Bosor. Let's say you didn't. What's it in a b'diavad? In other words, what we had before in this last case over here, okay, we're talking about really the chalav is almost like a case of b'diavad, because you would want to take Klippa. If it would be cheese, we take Kedei Klippa, okay, but you can't. So now what do? B'diavad. It's almost like a case of b'diavad. So even though the din is you have to take Kedei Klippa from the Bosor, but it's also shaykh din a b'diavad. What's going to be b'diavad? Let's say you were supposed to take Kedei Klippa and you didn't. This is the Ramah. B'makam shabosor tzorech Klippa imlei kilfuhu bishlukach mutar b'diavad. The Ramah paskins, it's mutar b'diavad. Now this there's a few ways of understanding this. Now, according to the way we just explained before, this whole idea, the machlekes Rabbeinu Tam Riva, is that this clip is mamash adin, like the Riva and the Taz hold, and therefore you mamash, it's mamash iser, and you need to shishim against it. Finished. Or it's up to the miyaker, the Kabbalah Porta, it absorbed a little bit. We don't know. We don't know how much it absorbed. Something it's going to absorb. So something it absorbs. So let's take the Kedei Klippa. So too over here, it looks like it's going l'shitosis. So then you're going to say, but the evidence can be mutter. You don't mamish need shishim against the Klippa. Is that what the Ramah means? Or does the Ramah mean What exactly did Ramah mean? And it's going to be a machlekes. Ma kavanas Ramah. Shem lo kilfu bishlas abasar umuta b'diavad. And this itself is a machlekes. So the Taz learns as follows. Kishachaticha sheneser klipasa kvar his bashla. Batam aklipa shalok kvar nispashel b'cholotavshu. You put this piece of meat into the cholent, and there's a bunch of other pieces of meat there. And now it's a case of b'diavad, because you cooked it, and now the tam of this kedei klipa spread out throughout the whole rest of the pot. So the Taz says, "Muta b'diavad ki iser kedei klipa ain't iser b'diavad." He holds the kedei klipa. It's not asking b'diavad. What's pshat? You know, it doesn't speak. I didn't see about it in this context. The Rebbe once spoke about the Indian that a mayan is matar b'kolshu. For a mikveh that you have, if it's rainwater, you need memso. But if it's a mayan matar b'kolshu. Whole machlekes whether that applies to people. You still need enough room for the. So you need memso just supposed to fit the whole body. Amal rev kimalamis. Those who want to say it only applies to kelim, but there are days that say that you don't need the memso if it's a mayan. And you let's say you have a little baby, so it could fit into much less water. So the Rebbe once discussed that theoretically speaking, he goyin that you could, if you could take one tipa, one drop of water, and spread it out so thin, it's a practical problem. You know, how are you going to do it? But in Higoyin, what does it mean, mashahu? That even one drop of water, if it could cover the whole body, you spread it out so thin, it covered the whole body, so it's also called the matar b'mashahu. So it's also okay. So what does it mean, kedei klipa? What is kedei klipa in scientific terms? Is it a millimeter? Is it a half of a millimeter? Is it a tenth of a millimeter? What's kedei klipa? Kedei klipa, according to this understanding, is epis. It's just epis. We have a practical problem. If you had a really, really super sharp knife, I mean, you do it with a laser beam, could burn off a tenth of a millimeter from the whole surface of basachas. Would that be good enough? Kedei klipa? Is there a minimum shear to kedei klipa? So since we want to take off the whole piece, it's going to be thicker than kedei greda. Okay, but that's just because we got practical problem. But in Higoyim, what does it mean kedei klipa? So if kedei klipa just means a mashahu, so then it's never going to ask a b'diavad. It's only mashahu. You're always going to have shishim against it. That's one way of understanding this task. That's what it means. It's not going to ask a b'diavad. How the meat finally fell into the pot. Shame. So that's what the Taz learns, that this piece b'diavad means it got mixed up and cooked with something else. But the Shach says no. The chaticha sheneser kliposet his arvim chatichas acheres b'tachatavshel. That it fell in. There's other pieces in the tavshel. In other words, let's say you have a piece that was also kedei klipa, and it got mixed up with some other pieces. So now we're not talking about it gather of bittul b'shishim anymore. That it's never going to also be the Shach says it's not an iser nicker. So according to both understandings, we have to understand that the kedei klip on the piece of meat is not like any other iser. You have to take off kedei klip. But the fact that it's not like a regular iser spiegelt sich up, that you see it expressed in the dida b'diavad. So from this we see that it's not like a regular iser. So according to the Shach, it's not a regular iser because it's not nicker. And according to the Taz, it's not going to ask a b'diavad because it's so small. When they're never going to ask a b'diavad. I mean, whether the Taz punkt means that or not is also a debate, but that's it could be he going behind the Taz. But anyway, it's a din according to it's clear according to the Ramah that it's not going to ask a b'diavad. The Shaila is exactly what case the Ramah is talking about. So according to the Taz, it's talking about a case that even this one piece got cooked into a kedera, and it's not going to ask a b'diavad. And the Shach says no. So the different pieces. So one of the pieces you can't tell which piece was which, and one of the pieces had the clip of being aser, but it's not considered to be an independent disser that's going to ask the rest of them. So that's the first case where you have one piece. That would be the easy way to remember the Taz. And according to the Shach, you got one piece among a bunch of other pieces, and that's the case where it's going to be mutter b'diavad. Okay, you notice that all of those pieces over there look like they're not cooked yet. So they're hot, but they're not cooked yet. That's going to be relevant for later on Siv Zayin. So the Das Taz Atzmei. So this is the Taz explaining the Ramah. Okay, because the Taz, you might want to ask. This is L'chura Seiser the Taz. The Taz wants to treat the klippa, the Rava, according to the explanation we gave before. He wants to treat the Kedei klippas as Mamasha Isser. So L'chura Taz says to himself, no, the Taz, he's explaining the Ramah. Why is the Ramah matabidiyah? But that's a Taz Atzmei, so he's passing like the Rava. Shagam b'di'ev rachtichasur. So just like the Riva, when it came to the milk, he treated the Kedei klippa that we can't take, but we could estimate the amount of it is considered Mamasha Isser, and it's gonna, you need Shishim against it. So the Taz himself holds like the Rava. So he holds also the Kedei klippa on the meat for sure Isser. And you're going to need Shishim against the Kedei klippa. But the Ramah, explaining the Ramah, what does the Ramah mean? When he wants to be Mata B'di'evet, the Taz doesn't agree with the Ramah himself. But what does the Ramah mean? He's talking, the Ramah wants to say that it's never going to Asa B'di'evet. Okay. So how are we doing?
According to the Shach, the piece itself you would be allowed to eat.
Yeah. You're talking about B'di'evet, the whole thing's putter, yeah?
I'm saying the Shach is
I mean,
the other
the
pieces.
B'di'evet, if you can identify the piece, then it's not B'di'evet. If it's already cooked and the time went in, so then that's already B'di'evet.
No, meaning you took the piece.
But
out
if
of
you
the
can take
milk.
off klippa, you have to take off klippa. We're normally assuming now that it got cooked into the whole thing and it got mixed up. You can't tell which is which anymore.
Right, but I'm saying you take out it fell into the milk, you took it out. Now you need klippa. Now you cooked it again in something else. You don't say that with other chatichas. The other chatichas, they don't.
You took klippa off the first after the.
You didn't do klippa. You didn't do klippa.
Yeah.
It fell in, so now you need to do klippa, but you didn't. So you cook it, right? Now, if you do with other chatichas, then you don't have to worry about the other chatichas. But what about the chaticha itself?
How do you know which is the chaticha?
You know which one
of
it
the
is.
other chatichas.
You know which
if
one.
You know which one it is, so take it, they klippa.
But is the whole chaticha
then it's not b'di'evet. You still know what it is. You fix what you can.
But is the whole chaticha aser?
The whole chaticha is not. You're saying because it has the kedei klippa. If you could identify it and you cooked it with the whole chaticha, did it spread out evenly
into the whole chaticha?
When you have it, so that is Simon Sadik base. Your question. Yeah, that's tipas cholav.
Yeah,
tipas cholav and chatichas Bosor, and there's other chatichas Bosor in the pot. Do we take shishim the whole pot to be mevatel tipas cholav, or do we need in that one piece to be mevatel tipas cholav? So if you're going to say according to the Taz, where you can see mamash is so you can compare it to Kesef, but the Shach doesn't look like he's comparing it like that. Okay, Rabbi side. So I'm making another appeal for Chazara, and I would really recommend tonight before you go to sleep, take the Chaveres, go over it, Chazar it over, and and just make sure you understand everything over there. Then tomorrow morning, go over it again. Don't let it, don't lose it. The quicker you do Chazara, the easier the Chazara is, and also if there's something's not understood, ask it when it's still fresh in your mind, and we'll Mirza Hashem be able to answer it. Okay, Rabbi Sai.
Maybe sending out a video recording?
Excuse me?
Sending out a video recording of the shiur?
Of
Not
this
just
one?
audio. Yeah, because last week just the audio came out.
No, but they sent out a link on the email to the video.
I didn't get it.
We sent out on the email. They send out after the videos are stored on Zoom.
Mhm.
So there's a Zoom link that you can view, and you can speed it up to double speed if you want. It's amusing anyway to listen to it like that. So it's like, people have different ideas of fun, so you can always listen to it make it sound like Mickey Mouse, listen to it fast. But anyway, so that they didn't share last week's video. I thought it was on the email.
I don't think so.
There's somebody, there's somebody that's supposed to take care of that. And you know what? I will double check. I thought I received a copy of it, but perhaps I didn't. But let me, so if it doesn't go out, somebody was hired to take care of this, but if it's not being done, so I will post it. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Fine. And once said The Rebbe once said, somebody spoke to me after Shavuos, he said, ich bin nicht darauf, ich bin noch auf dem Berg, still on Har Sinai. Ich bin noch also auf dem Berg. So it was still Chedesh Sivan. So man bleibt doch still in the spirit of Matan Torah. Anyway, fine. Zan Batzlacha Rabbi. Call to.